Hello! Hello, everybody, and welcome to Book Club for today. Hey, T2DM, Chase, Carethian, Glacier, Cece, Rienku, Harvest. How are you all doing? Are you excited to read The Picture of Dorian Gray? I know that I feel like this book is a more popular, common one. I think. I'm not sure. It's so hard to gauge, like, have you ever read this book before? Who was forced to read this book in school? It's so hard to gauge that. Hey, Cece. I forgot what book we were reading? I didn't forget what book we were reading. I only ever intended to do one stream of How to Be an Anti-Racist because that book is not in the public domain and it would be illegal for me to read too much of it, yeah. It's more of a trope than an actual read? I mean, as much as I would love to read that whole book and discuss it with the group, I can't record myself doing that online, legally speaking. You had to read To Kill a Mockingbird in English class? Oh yeah, I think like that's the one. That and like The Great Gatsby are the two books that probably most people have definitely read. Oh, got it, Cece. Well, that's fair. I always don't know whether it's the picture or the portrait of Dorian Gray, and I get it messed up. It's used more of a trope than people reading it directly. Interesting? See, that's really interesting because I have read this book before, but I remember pretty much nothing about it because I was like 13 or 14 and I was in high school, and like I read it really quickly, and I think I read it for a class, and I think I read an abridged version maybe. And I like really remember nothing about the book except for the main conceit of the book. That's what I remember. Everyone knows the outline without necessarily having read it, which is so interesting because like people think they know Frankenstein and Dracula, but then when you read the book, you're like, this has nothing to do with what I thought it. Like Dracula compared to Dracula the movies, the book compared to the movies, you're like, this has nothing to do with anything that I thought this was actually gonna be about. Which is fascinating. Recognize the general plotline? Okay, interesting. Was a fantastic book. Of Mice and Men, that's on the list. I have a list now, and I like went out and I looked, I timed myself reading aloud. I went and checked a bunch of books. I got PDFs for all of them. I timed how long it might take for us to go through them. I have certain books that I might save for certain holidays. And like I have books that are basically so short we could probably maybe read them in a single book club session. So like I've got like a whole screen what is it called? Spreadsheet. And please, if anybody else has any more books to recommend, please throw them in. Let me get the form for you. Please throw them into the form. I should just make this a Nightbot command. I'll make this a Nightbot command. Oops, wrong. That's me. Don't click on that. You already know. You're already here. That's the wrong thing I had saved to my clipboard. Give me a link, please. Give me a link and make it a shorter link. Please. You don't need that. There. Please recommend any other books that you're interested in reading for book club in the forum. If it's too long, I'm gonna rule it out, just so you know. This book is already on the long end. It's intense, but so essential. Well, I've never read it. Maybe that'll be the next one we read. It's really short. Like, it should take one, maybe two at most. If we just, like, really get lost in discussion and, like, run out of reading time, it should maybe take 2 streams at most for Of Mice and Men. It's very short. You will be missing Of Mice and Men. And the entire class cried? Oh, God. Oh, gosh. Okay. Because you could get it for free. That's fair, Glacier. Interesting. Fascinating. Okay. Interesting. Okay. Okay, cool. Well, then this is a good one to read for book club then, probably, because it's like, it'll be one that everybody gets to fully experience and make up their minds about. I remember enjoying the book, like I was like surprised that it was as easy to read as it was, and I was like surprised that it was like decently engaging, but I also just don't remember literally anything that happens in it. So It's more of a novella. Yeah, how long is long? Jane Eyre is long. Jane Eyre was way too long. I did not anticipate how long. Jane Eyre, when I like calculate at our reading speed, and obviously book club streams are longer, so Jane Eyre was about 18 hours of actual reading time, and then book club streams are longer because like we talk in between the chapters, we talk before the stream, we sometimes talk at the end of the stream, so it took us like, I think it took us like 7 or so book club streams, or 8, to get through that whole book, and one of those book club streams went for like almost 6 hours, so not that again. Jane Eyre is a chunk, yeah. So anything that's under that, and like if you suggest the book, I'll just like figure out if it's too long. And like this, honestly, Dorian Gray is gonna be a test, because Dorian Gray was, as I said, I think there were only like 3 or 4 other books suggested that were longer than this one. This one is still like way short. It's like a third of the length of Jane Eyre, so it's really not gonna be a big problem. But I wanna test this out to see how we feel about the length, how many streams it might take. I've still gotta like calculate the like book club stream time compared to reading aloud time and see how that fits in. Dracula is about it's longer than Dorian Gray, but it's not that much longer. It's honestly in about the range of A Picture of Dorian Gray. Surprisingly, I was surprised by that. So Dracula is on the table, but how this goes will inform our further choices. That being said, there's like 10 or so books that were suggested that are like 4 hours or less, and like that's really great. We've got short stories that we can do. There's like poetry we could read if we wanted to, so we have a lot of options. There's not a lot of diversity in canon literature, and I'm really bummed about that. I was kind of hoping that I would be able to read Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, but that was supposed to go into the canon like a year or so ago, and guess what happened? Copyright law got extended. Oh no! So now we don't get to read it. It's a shame. Now it's not gonna come out of copyright until like 2050. So, man. Hey, e-girl! Your dad looks like Oscar Wilde? That's awesome. That's awesome. 8 hours of reading aloud to get through Dorian. Okay, interesting. Interesting, yeah. We'll have to see how many book club streams. I'm hoping that it's gonna take basically 4 to maybe 6, depending on if we get really talkative about the book club streams, so like roughly a month. And I thought that was decent enough because like Pride Month, we can do that. This is like, I was like looking, I was like books by people of color, books by non-straight people, books by like, and it was just, it's like this book by Oscar Wilde and nothing else. And there's like a couple of like books that are kind of like anthologies or autobiographies of people in slavery, and I'm like, that's, not that those books aren't great, it's just that those books are severely depressing for me to read. So, how do you read a picture? You'd have to ask an art person. I am unfortunately not that. I'm not literate in art. Why can't the public domain be larger? Because Disney doesn't want it to be, that's why. Hey, cheers, e-girl. I am drinking today magnesium. So yeah, I'm gonna need your help to force me to drink this because it sucks. Okay, let me make sure that the video is not gonna blur itself. Anyways, we have the PDF for the Picture of Dorian Gray. !PDF, you will find it. You can also, if you have Apple Books or like an iPhone or an iPad or whatever, Apple Books has it for free. That's where I got it. You don't have to pay for it. I think you have to pay for it from Amazon. I'm not sure if maybe it's part of like the lending library or something. If you use a Kindle, maybe there's that. I think even if you do have to pay for it, it's only like $2 or something. And then obviously you can get like an ebook from your library or rent the book from your library if you're able to go outside in this day and age. Cheers, girl. Right? Right? You're correct, Too Drunk to Duck. You're very correct. The Spider-Man comic reading stream. Well, there's no reason that comics and graphic novels should be considered not parts of literature. So, I agree. Dorian was a term for gay men at one point? Oh, okay. Huh. Man, Oscar Wilde was so... This book came out in 1890. And I have to say, I'm not as familiar with this book as I am with Jane Eyre. I'm probably gonna like go find a biography of Oscar Wilde and be reading it in the background while I do this stream so that I can provide additional context about what's happened. I do know like some things about what was happening in the 1890s, which surprisingly, like there was a period of time during like the late 1800s, during the period of the Industrial Revolution, where gay people were more accepted than they eventually became in the 1900s. Like, it wasn't like they were, like, super great accepted or anything, but, like, gay men could like, go out to, like, their specific area of the city, and people were like, that's fine, just don't mess with them. And, like, there were also trans women who, you know, dressed appropriately for themselves who went outside, and like they were famous in, I don't remember if this was like New York, but it was a city in America, and or maybe it was London. It might have been London, because I believe it was actually Britain, yeah. But like, and they were like famous and very well known, and generally speaking, people left them alone, but then there was like a big court case about them because there was like a whole thing about like some rich guy got his heart broken, and like it was, But like, interestingly speaking, there were people who were more like out than they eventually became in the 1900s, and I need to like educate myself more about that so I can provide some historical context for this book. Yeah, which is so interesting. Allowed in certain social contexts. I had no idea that was the case. Hey, Candy. He was Oscar Wilde in. Yeah. But, like, I believe because it was Oscar Wilde's court case that really set off, because, like, Oscar Wilde went to court and he was like, I can't remember what specifically, you know what, I'm just going to pull up the Wikipedia article, because there was a court case involving Oscar Wilde that, woof, blah, 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 trials. Yeah, and yeah, so there was a court case that came against him basically because he was gay, so on charges of sodomy and gross indecency, and I believe that he pled not guilty, and he lost that, I believe. No, the jury was unable to reach a verdict, and so the final trial, he was convicted and sentenced to 2 years of hard labor. And like that was actually a big thing that happened because that court case kind of set the stage for more discrimination to occur for the 1900s to become like they were compared to what they were in the late 1800s, which sucks. He was treated poorly. Female friendship, yes, female friendship for sure. There's a lot of like, oh, Oscar Wilde's the only known non-straight person that we have, but like there's a lot of like lady authors historically where you're like, girl, what's up with you? I just got some questions. You're like living with other women your entire life. Nobody's ever said you're even mildly interested in men. You got treated like you were a spinster or like you were married to God or something like that. But I don't know that that's what was happening. Women got to get away with being much more covert for a much longer time. How much of X-Men is in the public domain? Probably not a lot. It basically, if it came out in like the 30s, It's probably not in the public domain because that's around when Disney started getting going. And so, as soon as Disney starts releasing things, copyright laws start to get weird. So, pretty much especially anything 1950s or later, you're not getting it. 1940s, 1930s, 1920s, they're all kind of like, it depends, because Disney, like, first Disney was like, oh, only things that are under the estate, or only things that are, like, if the author's still living, or only things, so there's like a bunch of like special cases for in between like the 1920s and the 1940s. I mean, I think it's partially that women were considered inferior and stupid and all that, but it's also that historical thing that, like, society really places a lot of interest on specifically penetrative sex, and so, like, women having sex with each other is not considered something that's going to diminish their value as property, which is the whole issue of, like, virginity, men, blah, 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 you gotta be, your value, dowries, and all that crap. And so, like, loving women wasn't considered as threatening because it wasn't going to tarnish the value of the property that you had in, like, your daughter or wife or whatever, which is bad. But hey. The importance of the male over the female. Yes, agreed. Or the ownership isn't clear, yeah. Until the 70s. Okay, maybe we'll have more movement. But that's why I'm so bummed about Chinua Achebe. There's a lot of, like, really good literature by brown people. It's fine. It's fine. So they would have timed that when he was created. Yes. Anyways, let's all gather together. We're going to be starting the Picture of Dorian Gray, and we will be starting it at the preface. We will be reading the preface. I think we skipped the preface for Jane Eyre because it was like a script that was added after the book was published. But this one is like a poem. And we'll be reading it as the beginning of the book. I'm gonna quiet the music because we're gonna be reading in silence. We shall be reading in silence. And again, if you're new to book club, the rules of book club are that, oh, the PDF doesn't have a preface. It's fine. The preface is really short, so it's cool. You'll just chill and read and listen. But the rules of book club are, generally speaking, that I'm going to read a section. I pause after we read a section and we can discuss it. And then I will announce I'm going to read the next section and we'll go off and read that. If you want to, like, donate and do bits and subscribe and that kind of thing, please try to time them for the in-betweeny parts, so just in case we're at, like, a very, like, climactic part of the plot and everybody doesn't get all spooked by donations and stuff. Yeah, and those are the only rules. Yeah, we have a PDF. Thanks, Chase, for letting the Bit Pony ride. We have a PDF, exclamation point PDF. It will bring it up in your browser. There's also, you can literally just Google Picture of Dorian Gray PDF. There's a lot of different options, and you can download them and stuff like that. And cheers, Crethian. So we will begin with the preface. The artist is the creator of beautiful things. To reveal art and conceal the artist is art's aim. The critic is he who can translate into another manner or a new material his impression of beautiful things. The highest, as the lowest, form of criticism is a mode of autobiography. Those who find ugly meanings in beautiful things are corrupt without being charming. This is a fault. Those who find beautiful meanings in beautiful things are the cultivated. For these there is hope. They are the elect to whom beautiful things mean only beauty. There is no such thing as a moral or an immoral book. Books are well written or badly written. That is all. The 19th century dislike of realism is the rage of Caliban seeing his own face in a glass. The 19th century dislike of romanticism is the rage of Caliban not seeing his own face in a glass. The moral life of man forms part of the subject matter of the artist, but the morality of art consists in the perfect use of an imperfect medium. No artist desires to prove anything. Even things that are true can be proved. No artist has ethical sympathies. An ethical sympathy in an artist is an unpardonable mannerism of style. No artist is ever morbid. The artist can express everything. Thought and language are to the artist instruments of an art. Vice and virtue are to the artist materials for an art. From the point of view of form, the type of all the arts is the art of the musician. From the point of view of feeling, the actor's craft is the type. All art is at once surface and symbol. Those who go beneath the surface do so at their peril. Those who read the symbol do so at their peril. It is the spectator, and not life, that art really mirrors. Diversity of opinion about a work of art shows that the work is new, complex, and vital. When critics disagree, the artist is in accord with himself. We can forgive a man for making a useful thing as long as he does not admire it. The only excuse for making a useless thing is that one admires it intensely. All art is quite useless. Oscar Wilde. Oh God. I just want to say Oscar Wilde seems like a person I'd have loved to hang out with, but he also seems kind of insufferable. You know what I mean? Like, it seems like I'd have a hard time, but I feel like I'd like him. Hey, Violet. Well, that was really brief. That was the whole preface. If anybody has anything to say before we move on to chapter 1. He liked his hot takes stated as fact, and he was very opinionated. He was an aestheticist, I believe. I don't remember what the specific term is, but he believed in, like, beauty for beauty's sake. And he believed in that as, like, one of the highest principles of life, going, like, all the way back to the Greeks. Yeah, Violet, you said it right. You said it right, Violet. That's exactly the impression of Oscar Wilde I get. It's like, oh, Oscar Wilde's a great person to party with, but maybe like maybe you don't want to like hang out with him the next morning when everybody's like hungover and you're just like, "Oh my god, Oscar." All right, that being said, let's start with chapter 1. The studio was filled with the rich odor of roses, and when the light summer wind stirred amidst the trees of the garden, there came through the open door the heavy scent of the lilac, or the more delicate perfume of the pink flowering thorn. From the corner of the divan of Persian saddlebags on which he was lying, smoking as was his custom innumerable cigarettes, Lord Henry Wotton could just catch the gleam of the honey-sweet and honey-colored blossoms of a laburnum, whose tremulous branches seemed hardly able to bear the burden of a beauty so flame-like as theirs. And now and then the fantastic shadows of birds in flight flitted across the long tussore silk curtains that were stretched in front of the huge window, producing a kind of momentary Japanese effect, and making him think of those pallid, jade-faced painters of Tokyo who, through the medium of an art that is necessarily immobile, seek to convey the sense of swiftness and motion. The sullen murmur of the bees shouldering their way through the long unmown grass, or circling with monotonous insistence round the dusty gilt horns of the straggling woodbine, seemed to make the stillness more oppressive. The dim roar of London was like the bourdon note of a distant organ. In the center of the room, clamped to an upright easel, stood the full-length portrait of a young man of extraordinary personal beauty, and in front of it, some little distance away, was sitting the artist himself, Basil Hallward, whose sudden disappearance some years ago caused at the time such public excitement and gave rise to so many strange conjectures. As the painter looked at the gracious and comely form he had so skillfully mirrored in his art, a smile of pleasure passed across his face, and seemed about to linger there. But he suddenly started up and, closing his eyes, placed his fingers upon the lids, as though he sought to imprison within his brain some curious dream from which he feared he might awake. "It is your best work, Basil, the best thing you have ever done," said Lord Henry languidly. "You must certainly send it next year to the Grosvenor. The Academy is too large and too vulgar. Whenever I have gone there have been either so many people that I have not been able to see the pictures, which was dreadful, or so many pictures that I have not been able to see the people, which was worse. Grosvenor is really the only place." "I don't think I shall send it anywhere," he answered, tossing his head back in that odd way that used to make his friends laugh at him at Oxford. "No, I won't send it anywhere." Lord Henry elevated his eyebrows and looked at him in amazement through the thin blue wreaths of smoke that curled up in such fanciful whorls from his heavy opium-tainted cigarette. "Not send it anywhere? My dear fellow, why? Have you any reason? What odd chaps you painters are! You do anything in the world to gain a reputation. As soon as you have one, you seem to want to throw it away. It is silly of you, for there is only one thing in the world worse than being talked about, and that's not being talked about. A portrait like this would set you far above all the young men in England, and make the old men quite jealous, if old men are ever capable of any emotion." We are, mistress. We're reading through chapter 1 right now. Exclamation point PDF if you need the book. "I know you will laugh at me," he replied, "but I really can't exhibit it. I have put too much of myself into it." Lord Henry stretched himself out on the divan and laughed. "Yes, I knew you would, but it is quite true all the same." "Too much of yourself in it? Upon my word, Basil, I didn't know you were so vain, and I really can't see any resemblance between you, with your rugged, strong face and your coal-black hair, and this young Adonis, who looks as if he was made out of ivory and rose-leaves. Why, my dear Basil, he is a Narcissus, and you— well, of course you have an intellectual expression and all that, but beauty, real beauty, ends where an intellectual expression begins. Intellect is in itself a mode of exaggeration, and destroys the harmony of any face. The moment one sits down to think, one becomes all nose or all forehead or something horrid. Look at the successful men in any of the learned professions. How perfectly hideous they are! Except, of course, in the church. But then, in the church they don't think. A bishop keeps on saying at the age of 80 what he was told to say when he was a boy of 18, and as a natural consequence he always looks absolutely delightful. Your mysterious young friend, whose name you have never told me, but whose picture really fascinates me, never thinks. I feel quite sure of that. He is some brainless, beautiful creature who should be always here in winter when we have no flowers to look at, and always here in summer when we want something to chill our intelligence. Don't flatter yourself, Basil. You're not in the least like him." "You don't understand me, Harry," answered the artist. "Of course I'm not like him. I know that perfectly well. Indeed, I should be sorry to look like him." "You shrug your shoulders. I'm telling you the truth. There is a fatality about all physical and intellectual distinction, the sort of fatality that seems to dog through history the faltering steps of kings. It is better not to be different from one's fellows. The ugly and the stupid have the best of it in this world. They can sit at their ease and gape at the play. If they know nothing of victory, they are at least spared the knowledge of defeat. They live as we all should live, undisturbed, indifferent, and without disquiet. They neither bring ruin upon others nor ever receive it from alien hands. Your rank and wealth, Harry, my brains, such as they are, my art, whatever it may be worth, Dorian Gray's good looks, we shall all suffer for what the gods have given us. Suffer terribly." "Dorian Gray, is that his name?" asked Lord Henry, walking across the studio towards Basil Hallward. "Yes, that is his name. I didn't intend to tell it to you." "But why not?" "Oh, I can't explain. When I like people immensely, I never tell their names to anyone. It is like surrendering a part of them. I have grown to love secrecy. It seems to be the one thing that can make modern life mysterious or marvelous to us. The commonest thing is delightful if one only hides it. When I leave town now, I never tell my people where I am going. If I did, I would lose all my pleasure. It is a silly habit, I dare say, but somehow it seems to bring a great deal of romance into one's life. I suppose you think me awfully foolish about it?" "Not at all," answered Lord Henry. "Not at all, my dear Basil. You seem to forget that I am married, and the one charm of marriage is that it makes a life of deception absolutely necessary for both parties. I never know where my wife is, and my wife never knows what I am doing. When we meet, we do meet occasionally when we dine out together or go down to the Duke's, we tell each other the most absurd stories with the most serious faces. My wife is very good at it, much better in fact than I am. She never gets confused over her dates, and I always do. But when she does find me out, she makes no row at all. I sometimes wish she would, but she merely laughs at me." I hate the way you talk about your married life, Harry, said Basil Hallward, strolling towards the door that led into the garden. I believe that you are really a very good husband, but that you are thoroughly ashamed of your own virtues. You're an extraordinary fellow. You never say a moral thing, and you never do a wrong thing. Your cynicism is simply a pose. Being natural is simply a pose, and the most irritating pose I know, cried Lord Henry, laughing, and the two young men went out into the garden together and ensconced themselves on a long bamboo seat that stood in the shade of a tall laurel bush. The sunlight slipped over the polished leaves. In the grass, white daisies were tremulous. After a pause, Lord Henry pulled out his watch. I am afraid I must be going, Basil, he murmured, and before I go, I insist on your answering a question I put to you some time ago. What is that? Said the painter, keeping his eyes fixed on the ground. You know quite well. I do not, Harry. Well, I will tell you what it is. I want you to explain to me why you won't exhibit Dorian Gray's picture. I want the real reason. I told you the real reason. No, you did not. You said it was because there was too much of yourself in it. Now that is childish. Harry, said Basil Hallward, looking him straight in the face, every portrait that is painted with feeling is a portrait of the artist, not of the sitter. The sitter is merely the accident, the occasion. It is not he who is revealed by the painter. It is rather the painter who, on the colored canvas, reveals himself. The reason I will not exhibit this picture is that I am afraid I have shown in it the secret of my own soul. Lord Henry laughed. And what is that? He asked. I will tell you, said Hallward, but an expression of perplexity came over his face. I am all expectation, Basil, continued his companion, glancing at him. Oh, there is really very little to tell, Harry, answered the painter, and I am afraid you will hardly understand it. Perhaps you will hardly believe it. Lord Henry smiled and, leaning down, plucked a pink-petaled daisy from the grass and examined it. I am quite sure I shall understand it, he replied, gazing intently at the little golden white feathered disc. And as for believing things, I can believe anything, provided that it is quite incredible. The wind shook some blossoms from the trees, and the heavy lilac blooms, with their clustering stars, moved to and fro in the languid air. A grasshopper began to chirrup by the wall, and like a blue thread in a long thin dragonfly, floated past on its brown gauze wings. Lord Henry felt as if he could hear Basil Hallward's heart beating, and wondered what was coming. The story is simply this, said the painter after some time. 2 months ago I went to a crush at Lady Brandon's. You know we poor artists have to show ourselves in society from time to time just to remind the public that we are not savages. With an evening coat and a white tie, as you told me once, anybody, even a stockbroker, can gain a reputation for being civilized. Well, after I had been in the room about 10 minutes, talking to huge overdressed dowagers and tedious academicians, I suddenly became conscious that someone was looking at me. I turned halfway round and saw Dorian Gray for the first time. When our eyes met, I felt that I was growing pale. A curious sensation of terror came over me. I knew that I had come face to face with someone whose mere personality was so fascinating that, if I allowed it to do so, it would absorb my whole nature, my whole soul, my very art itself. I did not want any external influence in my life. You know yourself, Harry, how independent I am by nature. I have always been my own master, had at least always been so, till I met Dorian Gray. Then, but I don't know how to explain it to you. Something seemed to tell me that I was on the verge of a terrible crisis in my life. I had a strange feeling that fate had in store for me exquisite joys and exquisite sorrows. I grew afraid and turned to quit the room. It was not conscience that made me do so. It was a sort of cowardice. I take no credit to myself for trying to escape. Conscience and cowardice are really the same things, Basil. Conscience is the trade name of the firm. That is all. I don't believe that, Harry, and I don't believe you do either. However, whatever was my motive, and it may have been pride, for I used to be very proud, I certainly struggled to the door. There, of course, I stumbled against Lady Brandon. "You are not going to run away so soon, Mr. Hallward," she screamed out. You know her curiously shrill voice? "Yes, she's a peacock in everything but beauty," said Lord Henry, pulling the daisy to bits with his long, nervous fingers. I could not get rid of her. She brought me up to royalties and people with stars and garters, and elderly ladies with gigantic tiaras and parrot noses. She spoke of me as her dearest friend. I had only met her once before, but she took it into her head to lionize me. I believe some picture of mine had made a great success at the time, at least had been chattered about in the penny newspapers, which is the 19th century standard of immortality. Suddenly I found myself face to face with the young man whose personality had so strangely stirred me. We were quite close, almost touching. Our eyes met again. It was reckless of me, but I asked Lady Brandon to introduce me to him. Perhaps it was not so reckless after all. It was simply inevitable. We would have spoken to each other without any introduction. I am sure of that. Dorian told me so afterwards. He, too, felt that we were destined to know each other. "And how did Lady Brandon describe this wonderful young man?" asked his companion. "I know she goes in for giving a rapid précis of all her guests. I remember her bringing me up to a truculent and red-faced old gentleman covered all over with orders and ribbons, and hissing into my ear in a tragic whisper which must have been perfectly audible to everybody in the room the most astounding details. I simply fled. I like to find out people for myself. But Lady Brandon treats her guests exactly as an auctioneer treats his goods. She either explains them entirely away, or tells one everything about them except what one wants to know." "Poor Lady Brandon, you are hard on her, Harry," said Hallward listlessly. "Oh, poor Lady Brandon, you are hard on her, Harry." "My dear fellow, she tried to found a salon, and only succeeded in opening a restaurant. How could I admire her? But tell me, what did she say about Mr. Dorian Gray?" "Oh, something like, 'Charming boy. Poor dear mother and I absolutely inseparable. Quite forget what he does. Afraid he doesn't do anything. Oh yes, plays the piano. Or is it the violin, dear Mr. Gray?' And neither of us could help laughing, and we became friends at once." "Laughter is not at all a bad beginning for a friendship. It is far the best ending for one," said the young lord, plucking another daisy. Hallward shook his head. "You don't understand what friendship is, Harry," he murmured. "Or what enmity is, for that matter. You like everyone. That is to say, you are indifferent to everyone." "How horribly unjust of you!" cried Lord Henry, tilting his hat back and looking up at the little clouds that, like ravelled skeins of glossy white silk, were drifting across the hollowed turquoise of the summer sky. "Yes, horribly unjust of you. I make a great difference between people. I choose my friends for their good looks, my acquaintances for their good characters, and my enemies for their good intellects. A man cannot be too careful in the choice of his enemies. I have not got one who is a fool. They are all men of some intellectual power, and consequently they all appreciate me. Is that very vain of me? I think it is rather vain." "I should think it was, Harry, but according to your category I must be merely an acquaintance." "My dear old Basil, you are much more than an acquaintance." "And much less than a friend. A sort of brother, I suppose." "Oh, brothers! I don't care for brothers. My elder brother won't die, and my younger brothers seem never to do anything else." "Harry!" exclaimed Hallward, frowning. "My dear fellow, I am not quite serious. But I can't help detesting my relations. I suppose it comes from the fact that none of us can stand other people having the same faults as ourselves. I quite sympathize with the rage of the English democracy against what they call the vices of the upper orders. The masses feel that drunkenness, stupidity, and immorality should be their own special property, and that if any of us makes an ass of himself, he is poaching on their preserves. When poor Southwark got into the divorce court, their indignation was quite magnificent, and yet I don't suppose that 10% of the proletariat live correctly." "I don't agree with a single word that you have said. And what is more, Harry, I feel sure you don't either." Lord Henry stroked his pointed brown beard and tapped the toe of his patent leather boot with a tasseled ebony cane. "How English you are, Basil! That is the second time you have made that observation. If one puts forward an idea to a true Englishman, always a rash thing to do, he never dreams of considering whether the idea is right or wrong. The only thing he considers of any importance is whether one believes it oneself. Now, the value of an idea has nothing whatsoever to do with the sincerity of the man who expresses it. Indeed, the probabilities are that the more insincere the person is, the more purely intellectual will the idea be, as in that case it will not be colored by either his wants, his desires, or his prejudice. However, I don't propose to discuss politics, sociology, or metaphysics with you. I like persons better than principles, and I like persons with no principles better than anything else in the world. Tell me more about Mr. Dorian Gray. How often do you see him?" "Every day. I couldn't be happy if I didn't see him every day. He is absolutely necessary to me." "How extraordinary! I thought you would never care for anything but your art." "He is all my art to me now," said the painter gravely. "I sometimes think, Harry, that there are only two eras of any importance in the world's history. The first is the appearance of a new medium for art, and the second is the appearance of a new personality for art also. What the invention of oil painting was to the Venetians, the face of Antinous was to the late Greek sculpture, and the face of Dorian Gray will some day be to me. It is not merely that I paint from him, draw from him, sketch from him. Of course I have done all that, but he is much more to me than a model or a sitter. I won't tell you that I am dissatisfied with what I have done of him, or that his beauty is such that art cannot express it. There is nothing that art cannot express, and I know that the work I have done since I met Dorian Gray is good work, is the best work of my life. But in some curious way, I wonder, will you understand me? His personality has suggested to me an entirely new manner in art, an entirely new mode of style. I see things differently. I think of them differently. I can now recreate life in a way that was hidden from me before. A dream of form in days of thought. Who is it who says that? I forget. But it is what Dorian Gray has been to me. The merely visible presence of this lad, for he seems to me little more than a lad, though he is really over 20, his merely visible presence. I wonder, can you realize all that that means? Unconsciously he defines for me the lines of a fresh school, a school that is to have in it all the passion of the romantic spirit, all the perfection of the spirit that is Greek, the harmony of soul and body. How much that is! We in our madness have separated the two, and have invented a realism that is vulgar, an ideality that is void. Harry, if you only knew what Dorian Gray is to me! You remember that landscape of mine, for which Agnew offered me such a huge price, but which I would not part with? It is one of the best things I have ever done. And why is it so? Because, while I was painting it, Dorian Gray sat beside me. Some subtle influence passed from him to me, and for the first time in my life I saw in the plain woodland the wonder I had always looked for, and always missed. Basil, this is extraordinary! I must see Dorian Gray. Hallward got up from the seat and walked up and down the garden. After some time he came back. "Harry," he said, "Dorian Gray is to me simply a motive in art. You might see nothing in him. I see everything in him. He is never more present in my work than when no image of him is there. He is a suggestion, as I have said, of a new manner. I find him in the curves of certain lines, and the loveliness and subtleties of certain colors. That is all." "Then why won't you exhibit his portrait?" asked Lord Henry. "Because, without intending it, I have put into it some expression of all this curious artistic idolatry, of which, of course, I have never cared to speak to him. He knows nothing about it, he shall never know anything about it, but the world might guess it, and I will not bare my soul to their shallow prying eyes. My heart shall never be put under their microscope. There is too much of myself in the thing, Harry, too much of myself." "Poets are not so scrupulous as you are. They know how useful passion is for publication. Nowadays a broken heart will run to many editions." "I hate them for it," cried Hallward. "An artist should create beautiful things, but should put nothing of his own life into them. We live in an age when men treat art as if it were meant to be a form of autobiography. We have lost the abstract sense of beauty. Some day I will show the world what it is, and for that reason the world shall never see my portrait of Dorian Gray." "I think you are wrong, Basil, but I won't argue with you. It is only the intellectually lost who ever argue. Tell me, is Dorian Gray very fond of you?" The painter considered for a few moments. "He likes me," he answered, after a pause. "I know he likes me. Of course, I flatter him dreadfully. I find a strange pleasure in saying things to him that I know I shall be sorry for having said. As a rule, he is charming to me, and we sit in the studio and talk of 1,000 things. Now and then, however, he is horribly thoughtless, and seems to take a real delight in giving me pain. Then I feel, Harry, that I have given away my whole soul to someone who treats it as if it were a flower to put in his coat, a bit of decoration to charm his vanity, an ornament for a summer's day." "Days in summer, Basil, are apt to linger," murmured Lord Henry. "Perhaps you will tire sooner than he will. It is a sad thing to think of, but there is no doubt that genius lasts longer than beauty. That accounts for the fact that we all take such pains to overeducate ourselves. In the wild struggle for existence, we want to have something that endures, and so we fill our minds with rubbish and facts, in the silly hope of keeping our place. The thoroughly well-informed man, that is the modern ideal. And the mind of the thoroughly well-informed man is a dreadful thing. It is like a bric-a-brac shop, all monsters and dust, with everything priced above its proper value. I think you will tire first, all the same. Some day you will look at your friend, and he will seem to you to be a little out of drawing, or you won't like his tone of color, or something. You will bitterly reproach him in your own heart, and seriously think that he has behaved very badly to you. The next time he calls, you will be perfectly cold and indifferent. It will be a great pity, for it will alter you. What you have told me is quite a romance. A romance of art, one might call it, and the worst of having a romance of any kind is that it leaves one so unromantic. Harry, don't talk like that. As long as I live, the personality of Dorian Gray will dominate me. You can't feel what I feel. You change too often. Ah, my dear Basil, that is exactly why I can feel it. Those who are faithful know only the trivial side of love. It is the faithless who know love's tragedies. And Lord Henry struck a light on a dainty silver case, and began to smoke a cigarette with a self-conscious and satisfied air, as if he had summed up the world in a phrase. There was a rustle of chirruping sparrows in the green lacquer leaves of the ivy, and the blue cloud shadows chased themselves across the grass like swallows. How pleasant it was in the garden, and how delightful other people's emotions were! Much more delightful than their ideas, it seemed to him. One's own soul and the passions of one's friends, those were the fascinating things in life. He pictured to himself with silent amusement the tedious luncheon that he had missed by staying so long with Basil Hallward. Had he gone to his aunt's, he would have been sure to have met Lord Goodbody there. And the whole conversation would have been about the feeding of the poor and the necessity for model lodging-houses. Each class would have preached the importance of those virtues, for whose exercise there was no necessity in their own lives. The rich would have spoken on the value of thrift, and the idle grown eloquent over the dignity of labor. It was charming to have escaped all that. As he thought of his aunt, an idea seemed to strike him. He turned to Hallward and said, "My dear fellow, I have just remembered." "Remembered what, Harry?" "Where I heard the name of Dorian Gray." "Where was it?" asked Hallward, with a slight frown. "Oh, don't look so angry, Basil. It was at my aunt, Lady Agatha's. She told me she had discovered a wonderful young man who was going to help her in the East End, and that his name was Dorian Gray. I am bound to state that she never told me he was good-looking. Women have no appreciation of good looks. At least good women have not. She said that he was very earnest and had a beautiful nature. I at once pictured to myself a creature with spectacles and lank hair, horribly freckled, and tramping about on huge feet. I wish I had known it was your friend." "I am very glad you didn't, Harry." "Why?" "I don't want you to meet him." "You don't want me to meet him?" "No." "Mr. Dorian Gray is in the studio, sir." "Mr. Dorian Gray is in the studio, sir," said the butler, coming into the garden. "You must introduce me now," cried Lord Henry, laughing. The painter turned to his servant, who stood blinking in the sunlight. "Ask Mr. Gray to wait, Parker. I shall be in a few moments." The man bowed and went up the walk. Then he looked at Lord Henry. "Dorian Gray is my dearest friend," he said. "He has a simple and a beautiful nature. Your aunt was quite right in what she said of him. Don't spoil him. Don't try to influence him. Your influence would be bad. The world is wide and has many marvelous people in it. Don't take away from me the one person who gives to my art whatever charm it possesses. My life as an artist depends on him. Mind, Harry, I trust you." He spoke very slowly, and the words seemed wrung out of him almost against his will. "What nonsense you talk," said Lord Henry, smiling, and, taking Hallward by the arm, he almost led him into the house. And that was chapter 1. So there was a lot of talk that happened while I was reading. I'm going to go back and read it all now. Hmm. Hmm. I see. Lord Goodbody, subtle. Yes, Lord Goodbody was very, very subtle. Um, I see, okay, Chase and Violet. I see both of what you are saying. Um, I think that there was basically a miscommunication that happened here because Chase, I can see how you are trying to Chase, it seems to me you're trying to provide historical context about how basically Oscar Wilde tried to make his book and like some of his perspectives more palatable to wider society, even though Oscar Wilde was very, very gay. And so, Chase, you were trying to contextualize this book, like the work of art that is the book itself, by trying to explain how like the people of the time who didn't like gay things would have approached this book. I see what you're saying, Chase. Violet, I understand how you interpreted that as in the way that you did because that perspective has historically been used as an argument against why, LGBT scholars going back and rereading works from other authors and saying like, hey, maybe this person was probably gay and like didn't come out and didn't say it and was in the closet, but this person was probably gay, and that kind of perspective tends to get weaponized to be like, oh, but people were different back then. Women were just closer friends, or like, Greek people weren't all gay. Like people tend to use that perspective to go back and dismiss it. So I can see why like we're talking in text here in chat, and things are nebulous, like you can't tell the tone, and it's like it's hard to fully communicate all of our ideas. I can see why this miscommunication happened. Yes, obviously Oscar Wilde is gay. Oscar Wilde is gay, and honestly, I think he's writing a very gay book. I don't even think that he was trying to, because Oscar Wilde wasn't about hiding any aspect of himself, really, which is one of the reasons why, he's like the only gay author really that like we can conclusively point to and be like, look, he was gay, because he was very out about himself. And I mean, that's why he got taken to court, because he was too out and some lady didn't like it, so she took him to court for it, and he lost the court battle. And like I said, it set up the whole 1900 years, or the whole like 1900s for where we're at with gay everything nowadays. So far, it seems very gay. It is very gay. Like Oscar Wilde basically traveled in his own sphere of people who knew about gay people and like were more comfortable with them, and like I said, for the most part at the time they kept to themselves and the rest of the world kept to themselves, and the rest of the world would like read about like the scandals and stuff like that, but it wasn't that big of a deal. And there were a lot of Victorian people at the time who, like earlier in the book, the guy was talking about his relationship with his wife, of like, oh, we both had secret lives. That was actually not uncommon in Victorian times. Like the idea of Victorian couples really loving each other is, or I say Victorian, this isn't necessarily Victorian, this is like the late 1800s and the early 1900s, but still around this time it was not common for people to really love each other. It wasn't super common for them to be like revealing their deep feelings to one another, even if they were married. Like it wasn't always considered appropriate for a relationship, even one in which like even in one in which both people were presumed heterosexual and were presumed to care about each other. It wasn't common to be telling them every aspect about their lives. And so living kind of like two separate lives, especially two separate lives with like hidden maybe affairs, or maybe you were gay, and like those were things that happened a lot. Like women, there were a lot there, like historically speaking, we have like journals and diaries of men back in 1800s and early 1900s who were married to women who were gay, and the women pretty much knew that they were gay, but they didn't talk about it, but the women like got out of the way and like let that happen, and the women had their own like life, like they had their own people that they were going out to see. So yeah, this kind of like, oh, I don't talk to my wife about this, oh, we have our own secret lives, that's actually really common and was just uh, the de facto mode of operation usually for like gay men of this era, is if they had a wife who would allow that, then that was how they would do it. Marriage was a contract, yeah, and many marriages were arranged. Yeah, all of that is true. Um, so far, it seems very gay. Yes. So yeah, it's such a. I haven't read Unmentionables because then the women were protected as well. Yes, and like some women, like for some women, women who were more who had like less traditional personalities, shall we say, like women who like imagine me in this era, like I'm like independent and I don't want somebody else to control my actions. It is very possible that like I would go off at this time because like I need a man to like legally speaking to protect me and all this crap. It's very possible that I would go off and I would find somebody and I would be like, "Hey, I can tell you're not into me as a woman. If I marry you, you'll let me have my own independent lifestyle and I don't have to like go to you for like permission to be doing things, right? You'll just let me live my own life." And like that tended to be a deal that worked out more often than not. Was like, I get to be my own independent woman and you get to go and do your thing, and we're just not going to mess with each other's lives, and this is how we're going to do it. And this period of history is so interesting specifically because people were not very open about many things. A Boston marriage. Yeah, exactly. Ann Lister, yes. I'm gonna pull up a little thing about Ann Lister because I feel like I know. I've heard of her. Yeah, yes. I have heard of Anne. Yeah. So I'm glad they've decoded most of her diaries. Cause I know, cause there were so many that like, cause like I don't know, for some reason, also in this time period in like the later like 1850s to like 1900s, it was like really fashionable to keep your own diary and like to detail all of the scandalous aspects of your life for some reason. And usually if you were a gay person, you would burn it. Like when you would be like, on my deathbed, burn my shit, like don't let people find out that this is what I was doing. It's gonna be bad for my descendants, just burn my shit. But some of those journals, like I remember there is one guy and I don't remember his name, but he was gay and his wife kept his journal after he died, and like wanted to preserve it for his children essentially. And so we still have that journal, and it's like detailing how he went about like in society, basically keeping everything on the DL, but definitely having his one life partner. And like that's how we know a lot of like, oh, so this is how people maneuvered it, this is how we do it. She wanted them burned. Yeah, that was the really common thing. And so I think that like, whew, yeah, it's just, I mean, that's a lot of queer history, unfortunately, is so much like you have to read in between the lines and you have to read the subtext, and there were these larger movements in society, and it's like, yeah, but why did those become movements in society? Delete my browsing history. Yeah. Yes. um so yeah, that was like the climate. And again, Oscar Wilde was like a big deal just even in the time, because like he was always making headlines because he was like scandalous AF, and he was just doing crazy shit all the time because he pretty much he doesn't care about your morals. He really likes like theatrical things. He's into the aesthetics. He's just doing crazy shit all the time. He's got like this like bar that like all the gay people in town go and frequent, and there's always scandals going on with like people having affairs with people's wives slash husbands and stuff like that. So Oscar Wilde was like a minor celebrity at the time, and everybody knew about him, and everybody knew what his deal was. And like maybe they told themselves specific. He was a gay rich hedonist, and people hated it, and he loved it. Yeah, 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 kind of. He was kind of like people were always like, oh, Oscar Wilde, always going out there being a fucking crazy, like ruining our morals of society and blah blah blah. But also at the same time, they loved it. They were like, oh my god, Oscar Wilde, so scandalous, I can't deal with it. Oh, what did he do today, Marion? Tell me. So very like honestly I have no idea how he was so brave, frankly. I like goddamn going out there and just being completely unabashed and unashamed and defending himself in court and like all like he's something. Did he have fuck you money? Did he have fuck you? He had a lot of money. I guess he had enough money, I guess, to be fuck you money. I mean, he didn't have a job, so he was like one of those rich people, and he was like, yeah, I gotta read a biography of him so that I can like come back here and give you all the deets. I give you all the deets in the down low on him because I haven't actually. I've like seen like documentaries and stuff, but I haven't actually like read a full biography. To do what he wanted for as long as he did. And he had enough money to defend himself in court. So, twice. Envious of this fancy fan? This actually is an antique fan, and it belonged to some French lady who lived in Vietnam, and I got it in Vietnam, and it was like hand painted and crap. So stubborn. But yeah, any opinions on chapter 1? Uh I will say that I'm very excited about how witty this book is. I forgot like I forgot, but not I didn't forget. It's just that I'm like, wow, it's even wittier than I remember it being. I'm excited for Dorian Gray to come in. I don't know what kind of voice I'm going to use for Dorian Gray. I wonder if his voice is described anywhere. I'll do my best. That's all I can say that I can do, is my best. Let me check here real quick. Not accents. I'm not going to do an accent. Just like, I'm wondering, like, I don't have a good impression on, like, his character, so I wonder how he talks. I have the feeling that he probably talks softly in the beginning. I don't know. We'll have to see. I'll figure it out as we go along. I'm sorry that it's going to be all over the place. Like I said, I don't remember this book very well. So I don't have Cockney? God, no. Oh, yeah, the importance of being earnest. Yeah, I've read that and seen it. I feel like Dorian Gray, yes. Dorian Gray is like I kind of read it as like a manifesto about like beauty and morality and basically like the fakeness of society kind of. And interestingly condemning cynicism in a certain way, which is interesting because like I believe Wilde was known as a cynic. I'm not 100% sure on that, but with a Cockney accent. The kind of FU thing is that his trial was started because of the digging that went with him suing someone else. Huh. Again, I'm gonna have to read more. I'm gonna have to read more to figure it out. So, it does. That being said, Damn, all right, Oscar Wilde. Damn, okay. All right. You go. That being said, let's head into chapter 2. As they entered, they saw Dorian Gray. He was seated at the piano, with his back to them, turning over the pages of a volume of Schumann's Forest Scenes. "You must lend me these, Basil," he cried. "I want to learn them. They are perfectly charming." That entirely depends on how you sit today, Dorian." "Oh, I am tired of sitting, and I don't want a life-sized portrait of myself," answered the lad, swinging round on the music stool in a wilful, petulant manner. When he caught sight of Lord Henry, a faint blush colored his cheeks for a moment, and he started up. "I beg your pardon, Basil, but I didn't know you had anyone with you." "This is Lord Henry Wotton, Dorian, an old Oxford friend of mine. I have just been telling him what a capital sitter you were, and now you have spoiled everything." "You have not spoiled my pleasure in meeting you, Mr. Gray," said Lord Henry, stepping forward and extending his hand. "My aunt has often spoken to me about you. You are one of her favorites, and, I am afraid, one of her victims also." "I am in Lady Agatha's black books at present," answered Dorian, with a funny look of penitence. "I promised to go to a club in Whitechapel with her last Tuesday, and I really forgot all about it. We were to have played a duet together, 3 duets, I believe. I don't know what she will say to me. I am far too frightened to call." "Oh, I will make your peace with my aunt. She is quite devoted to you. And I don't think it really matters about your not being there. The audience probably thought it was a duet. When Aunt Agatha sits down to the piano, she makes quite enough noise for 2 people." "That is very horrid to her, and not very nice to me," answered Dorian. "Oh, that is very horrid to her, and not very nice to me," answered Dorian, laughing. Lord Henry looked at him. Yes, he was certainly wonderfully handsome, with his finely curved scarlet lips, his frank blue eyes, his crisp golden hair. There was something in his face that made one trust him at once. All the candor of youth was there, as well as all the youth's passionate purity. One felt that he had kept himself unspotted from the world. No wonder Basil Hallward worshipped him. "You are too charming to go in for philanthropy, Mr. Gray. Far too charming." And Lord Henry flung himself down on the divan and opened his cigarette case. The painter had been busy mixing his colors and getting his brushes ready. He was looking worried, and when he heard Lord Henry's last remark, he glanced at him, hesitated for a moment, and then said, "Harry, I want to finish this picture today. Would you think it awfully rude of me if I asked you to go away?" Lord Henry smiled and looked at Dorian Gray. "Am I to go, Mr. Gray?" he asked. "Oh, please don't, Lord Henry. I see that Basil is in one of his sulky moods, and I can't bear him when he sulks. Besides, I want you to tell me why I should not go in for philanthropy." "I don't know that I shall tell you that, Mr. Gray. It is so tedious a subject that one would have to talk seriously about it. But I certainly shall not run away, now that you have asked me to stop. You don't really mind, Basil, do you? You have often told me that you liked your sitters to have someone to chat to." Hallward bit his lip. "If Dorian wishes it, of course you must stay. Dorian's whims are laws to everybody except himself." Lord Henry took up his hat and gloves. "You are very pressing, Basil, but I am afraid I must go. I have promised to meet a man at the Orleans. Good-bye, Mr. Gray. Come and see me some afternoon in Curzon Street. I am nearly always at home at 5 o'clock. Write to me when you are coming. I should be sorry to miss you." "Basil," cried Dorian Gray, "if Lord Henry Wotton goes, I shall go too. You never open your lips while you are painting, and it is horribly dull standing on a platform and trying to look pleasant. Ask him to stay. I insist upon it." "Stay, Harry, to oblige Dorian, and to oblige me," said Hallward, gazing intently at his picture. "It is quite true I never talk when I am working, and never listen either, and it must be dreadfully tedious for my unfortunate sitters. I beg you to stay." "But what about my man at the Orleans?" The painter laughed. "I don't think there will be any difficulty about that. Sit down again, Harry. And now, Dorian, get up on the platform, and don't move about too much or pay any attention to what Lord Henry says. He has a very bad influence over all his friends, with the single exception of myself." Dorian Gray stepped up on the dais with the air of a young Greek martyr, and made a little moo of discontent to Lord Henry, to whom he had rather taken a fancy. He was so unlike Basil. They made a delightful contrast, and he had such a beautiful voice. After a few moments he said to him, "Have you really a bad influence, Lord Henry? As bad as Basil says?" "There is no such thing as a good influence, Mr. Gray. All influence is immoral. Immoral from the scientific point of view." "Why?" "Because to influence a person is to give him one's own soul. He does not think his natural thoughts or burn with his natural passions. His virtues are not real to him. His sins, if there are such things as sins, are borrowed. He becomes an echo of someone else's music, an actor of a part that has not been written for him. The aim of life is self-development. To realize one's nature perfectly, that is what each of us is here for. People are afraid of themselves nowadays. They have forgotten the highest of all duties, the duty that one owes to oneself. Of course they are charitable. They feed the hungry and clothe the beggar, but their own souls starve and are naked. Courage has gone out of our race. Perhaps we never really had it. The terror of society, which is the basis of morals, the terror of God, which is the secret of religion, these are two things that govern us. And yet, just turn your head a little more to the right, Dorian, like a good boy," said the painter, deep in his work, and conscious only that a look had come into the lad's face that he had never seen there before. "And yet," continued Lord Henry in his low musical voice, and with that graceful wave of a hand that was always so characteristic of him, and that he had even in his Eton days, "I believe that if one man were to live out his life fully and completely, were to give form to every feeling, expression to every thought, reality to every dream, I believe that the world would gain such a fresh impulse of joy that we would forget all the maladies of medievalism and return to the Hellenistic ideal, to something finer, richer than the Hellenic ideal, it may be. But the bravest man among us is afraid of himself. The mutilation of the savage has its tragic survival in the self-denial that mars our lives. We are punished for our refusals. Every impulse that we strive to strangle broods in the mind and poisons us. The body sins once and has done with its sin, for action is a mode of purification. Nothing remains then but the recollection of a pleasure, or the luxury of a regret. The only way to get rid of a temptation is to yield to it. Resist it, and your soul grows sick with longing for the things it has forbidden to itself, with desire for what its monstrous laws have made monstrous and unlawful. It has been said that the great events of the world take place in the brain. It is in the brain, and the brain only, that the great sins of the world take place also. You, Mr. Gray, you yourself, with your rose-red youth and your rose-white boyhood, you have had passions that have made you afraid, thoughts that have filled you with terror, daydreams and sleeping dreams whose mere memory might stain your cheek with shame." "Stop!" faltered Dorian Gray. "Stop! You bewilder me. I don't know what to say. There is some answer to you, but I cannot find it. Don't speak. Let me think, or rather let me try not to think." For nearly 10 minutes he stood there, motionless, with parted lips and eyes strangely bright. He was dimly conscious that entirely fresh influences were at work within him. Yet they seemed to him to have come really from himself. The few words that Basil's friend had said to him, words spoken by chance, no doubt, and with willful paradox in them, had touched some secret chord that had never been touched before, but that he felt was now vibrating and throbbing to curious pulses. Music had stirred him like that. Music had troubled him many times. But music was not articulate. It was not a new world, but rather another chaos that it created in us. Words, mere words! How terrible they were! How clear and vivid and cruel! One could not escape from them. And yet what a subtle magic there was in them. They seemed to be able to give a plastic form to formless things, and to have a music of their own as sweet as that of viol or of lute. Mere words! Was there anything so real as words? Yes, there had been things in his boyhood that he had not understood. He understood them now. Life suddenly became fiery-colored to him. It seemed to him that he had been walking in fire. Why had he not known it? With his subtle smile, Lord Henry watched him. He knew the precise psychological moment when to say nothing. He felt intensely interested. He was amazed at the sudden impression that his words had produced, and, remembering a book that he had read when he was 16, a book which had revealed to him much that he had not known before, he wondered whether Dorian Gray was passing through a similar experience. He had merely shot an arrow into the air. Had it hit the mark? How fascinating the lad was! Hallward painted away with that marvelous bold touch of his that had the true refinement and perfect delicacy that in art, at any rate, comes only from strength. He was unconscious of the silence. "Basil, I am tired of standing," cried Dorian Gray suddenly. "I must go out and sit in the garden. The air is stifling here." "My dear fellow, I am so sorry. When I am painting I can't think of anything else. But you never sat better. You were perfectly still. And I have caught the effect I wanted. The half-parted lips and the bright look in the eyes. I don't know what Harry has been saying to you, but he has certainly made you have the most wonderful expression. I suppose he has been paying you compliments. You mustn't believe a word that he says." "He has certainly not been paying me compliments. Perhaps that is the reason I don't believe anything he has told me." "You know you believe it all," said Lord Henry, looking at him with his dreamy, languorous eyes. "I will go out to the garden with you. It is horribly hot in the studio. Basil, let us have something iced to drink, something with strawberries in it." "Certainly, Harry. Just touch the bell, and when Parker comes I will tell him what you want. I have got to work up this background, so I will join you later on. Don't keep Dorian too long. I have never been in better form for painting than I am today. This is going to be my masterpiece. It is my masterpiece as it stands." Lord Henry went out to the garden and found Dorian Gray burying his face in the great cool lilac blossoms, feverishly drinking in their perfume, as if it had been wine. He came close to him and put his hand upon his shoulder. "You are quite right to do that," he murmured. "Nothing can cure the soul but the senses, just as nothing can cure the senses but the soul." The lad started and drew back. He was bareheaded, and the leaves had tossed his rebellious curls and tangled all their gilded threads. There was a look of fear in his eyes, such as people have when they are suddenly awakened. His finely chiseled nostrils quivered, and some hidden nerve shook the scarlet of his lips and left them trembling. "Yes," continued Lord Henry, "that is one of the great secrets of life, to cure the soul by means of the senses, and the senses by means of the soul. You are a wonderful creature. You know more than you think you know, just as you know less than you want to know." Dorian Gray frowned and turned his head away. He could not help liking the tall, graceful young man who was standing by him. His romantic, olive-colored face and worn expression interested him. There was something in his low, languid voice that was absolutely fascinating. His cool, white, flower-like hands even had a curious charm. They moved, as he spoke, like music, and seemed to have a language of their own. But he felt afraid of him, and ashamed of being afraid. Why had it been left for a stranger to reveal him to himself? He had known Basil Hallward for months, but the friendship between them had never altered him. Suddenly there had come someone across his life who seemed to have disclosed to him life's mystery. And yet, what was there to be afraid of? He was not a schoolboy or a girl. It was absurd to be frightened. "Let us go and sit in the shade," said Lord Henry. "Parker has brought out the drinks, and if you stay any longer in this glare you will be quite spoiled, and Basil will never paint you again. You really must not allow yourself to become sunburnt. It would be unbecoming." "What can it matter?" cried Dorian Gray, laughing, as he sat down on the seat at the end of the garden. "It should matter everything to you, Mr. Gray." "Why?" "Because you have the most marvelous youth, and youth is the one thing worth having." "Why, I don't feel that, Lord Henry." "No, you don't feel it now. Some day when you are old and wrinkled and ugly, when thought has seared your forehead with its lines and passion branded your lips with its hideous fires, you will feel it. You will feel it terribly. Now, wherever you go, you charm the world. Will it always be so? You have a wonderfully beautiful face, Mr. Gray. Don't frown, you have. And beauty is a form of genius, is higher indeed than genius, as it needs no explanation. It is of the great facts of the world, like sunlight or springtime or the reflection in dark waters of that silver shell we call the moon. It cannot be questioned. It has its divine right of sovereignty, and makes princes of those who have it. You smile? Ah, when you have lost it, you won't smile. People say sometimes that beauty is only superficial. That may be so, but at least it is not so superficial as thought is. To me, beauty is the wonder of wonders. It is only shallow people who do not judge by appearances. The true mystery of the world is the visible, not the invisible. Yes, Mr. Gray, the gods have been good to you, but what the gods give they quickly take away. You have only a few years in which to live really, perfectly, and fully. When your youth goes, your beauty will go with it, and then you will suddenly discover that there are no triumphs left for you, or have to content yourself with those mean triumphs that the memory of your past will make more bitter than defeat. Every month, as it wanes, brings you nearer to something dreadful. Time is jealous of you and wars against your lilies and your roses. You will become sallow, and hollow-cheeked, and dull-eyed. You will suffer horribly. Realize your youth while you have it. Don't squander the gold of your days listening to the tedious, trying to improve the hopeless failure, or giving away your life to the ignorant, the common, and the vulgar. These are the sickly aims, the false ideals of our age. Live! Live the wonderful life that is in you. Let nothing be lost upon you. Be always searching for new sensations. Be afraid of nothing. A new hedonism, that is what our century wants. You might be its visible symbol. With your personality, there is nothing you could not do. The world belongs to you for a season. The moment I met you, I saw that you were quite unconscious of what you really are, of what you really might be. There was so much in you that charmed me that I felt I must tell you something about yourself. I thought how tragic it would be if you were wasted. For there is such a little time that your youth will last. Such a little time. The common hill flowers wither, but they blossom again. The laburnum will be as yellow next June as it is now. In a month there will be purple stars on the clematis, and year after year the green night of its leaves will hold its purple stars. But we never get back our youth. The pulse of joy that beats in us at 20 becomes sluggish. Our limbs fail, our senses rot. We degenerate into hideous puppets, haunted by the memory of the passions of which we were too much afraid, and the exquisite temptations that we had not the courage to yield to. Youth! Youth! There is absolutely nothing in the world but youth! Dorian Gray listened, open-eyed and wondering. The spray of lilac fell from his hand upon the gravel. A furry bee came and buzzed round it for a moment. Then it began to scramble all over the oval, stellated globe of the tiny blossoms. He watched it with that strange interest in trivial things that we try to develop when things of high import make us afraid, or when we are stirred by some new emotion for which we cannot find expression, or when some thought that terrifies us lays sudden siege to the brain and calls on us to yield. After a time the bee flew away. He saw it creeping into the stained trumpet of a Tyrian convolvulus. The flowers seemed to quiver, and then swayed gently to and fro. Suddenly the painter appeared at the door of the studio and made staccato signs for them to come in. They turned to each other and smiled. "I am waiting," he cried. "Do come in. The light is quite perfect, and you can bring your drinks." They rose up and sauntered down the walk together. 2 green and white butterflies fluttered past them, and in the pear tree at the corner of the garden a thrush began to sing. "You are glad you have met me, Mr. Gray," said Lord Henry, looking at him. "Yes, I am glad now. I wonder, shall I always be glad?" "Always! It is a dreadful word. It makes me shudder when I hear it. Women are so fond of using it. They spoil every romance by trying to make it last forever. It is a meaningless word, too. The only difference between a caprice and a lifelong passion is that the caprice lasts a little longer." As they entered the studio, Dorian Gray put his hand upon Lord Henry's arm. "In that case, let our friendship be a caprice," he murmured, flushing at his own boldness, and then stepped up on the platform and resumed his pose. Lord Henry flung himself into a large wicker armchair and watched him. The sweep and dash of the brush on the canvas made the only sound that broke the stillness, except when, now and then, Hallward stepped back to look at his work from a distance. In the slanting beams that streamed through the open doorway, the dust danced and was golden. The heavy scent of the roses seemed to brood over everything. After about a quarter of an hour, Hallward stopped painting, looked for a long time at Dorian Gray, and then for a long time at the picture, biting the end of one of his huge brushes and frowning. "It is quite finished," he cried at last, and stooping down he wrote his name in long vermilion letters on the left-hand corner of the canvas. Lord Henry came over and examined the picture. It was certainly a wonderful work of art, and a wonderful likeness as well. "My dear fellow, I congratulate you most warmly," he said. "It is the finest portrait of modern times. Mr. Gray, come over and look at yourself." The lad started, as if awakened from some dream. "Is it really finished?" he murmured, stepping down from the platform. "Quite finished," said the painter. and you have sat splendidly today. I am awfully obliged to you." "That is entirely due to me," broke in Lord Henry. "Isn't it, Mr. Gray?" Dorian made no answer, but passed listlessly in front of the picture, and turned towards it. When he saw it he drew back, and his cheeks flushed for a moment with pleasure. A look of joy came into his eyes, as if he had recognized himself for the first time. He stood there motionless and in wonder, dimly conscious that Hallward was speaking to him, but not catching the meaning of his words. The sense of his own beauty came on him like a revelation. He had never felt it before. Basil Hallward's compliments had seemed to him to be merely the charming exaggerations of friendship. He had listened to them, laughed at them, forgotten them. They had not influenced his nature. Then had come Lord Henry Wotton, with his strange panegyric on youth, his terrible warning of its brevity. That had stirred him at the time, and now as he stood gazing at the shadow of his own loveliness, the full reality of the description flashed across him. Yes, there would be a day when his face would be wrinkled and wizen, his eyes dim and colorless, the grace of his figure broken and deformed. The scarlet would pass away from his lips, and the gold steal from his hair. The life that was to make his soul would mar his body. He would become dreadful, hideous, and uncouth. As he thought of that, a sharp pang of pain struck through him like a knife, and made each delicate fiber of his nature quiver. His eyes deepened into amethyst, and across them came a mist of tears. He felt as if a hand of ice had been laid upon his heart. "Don't you like it?" cried Hallward at last, stung a little by the lad's silence, not understanding what it meant. "Of course he likes it," said Lord Henry. "Who wouldn't like it? It is one of the greatest things in modern art. I will give you anything you like to ask for it. I must have it." "It is not my property, Harry." "Whose property is it?" "Dorian's, of course," answered the painter. "He is a very lucky fellow." "How sad it is," murmured Dorian Gray, with his eyes still fixed upon his own portrait. "How sad it is. I shall grow old and horrible and dreadful. But this picture will remain always young. It will never be older than this particular day of June. If it were only the other way! If it were I who was to be always young, and the picture that was to grow old! For that, I would give everything. Yes, there is nothing in the whole world I would not give. I would give my soul for that." "You would hardly care for such an arrangement, Basil," cried Lord Henry, laughing. "It would be rather hard lines on your work." "I should object very strongly, Harry," said Hallward. Dorian Gray turned and looked at him. "I believe you would, Basil. You like your art better than your friends. I am no more to you than a green bronze figure. Hardly as much, I dare say." The painter stared in amazement. It was so unlike Dorian to speak like that. What had happened? He seemed quite angry. His face was flushed and his cheeks burning. "Yes," he continued, "I am less to you than your ivory Hermes or your silver fawn. You will like them always. How long will you like me? Till I have my first wrinkle, I suppose. I know now that when one loses one's good looks, whatever they may be, one loses everything. Your picture has taught me that. Lord Henry Wotton is perfectly right. Youth is the only thing worth having. When I find that I am growing old, I shall kill myself." Hallward turned pale and caught his hand. "Dorian! Dorian!" he cried. "Don't talk like that. I have never had such a friend as you, and I shall never have such another. You are not jealous of material things, are you? You who are finer than any of them." "I am jealous of everything whose beauty does not die. I am jealous of the portrait you have painted of me. Why should it keep what I must lose? Every moment that passes takes something from me and gives something to it. Oh, if it were only the other way! If the picture could change and I could always be what I am now. Why did you paint it? It will mock me some day, mock me horribly." The hot tears welled into his eyes. He tore his hand away, and flinging himself on the divan, he buried his face in the cushions as though he was praying. "This is your doing, Harry," said the painter bitterly. Lord Henry shrugged his shoulders. "It is the real Dorian Gray. That is all." "It is not." "If it is not, what have I to do with it?" "You should have gone away when I asked you," he muttered. "I stayed when you asked me," was Lord Henry's answer. "Harry, I can't quarrel with my two best friends at once, but between you both, you have made me hate the finest piece of work I have ever done, and I will destroy it. What is it but canvas and color? I will not let it come across our 3 lives and mar them." Dorian Gray lifted his golden head from the pillow, and with pallid face and tear-stained eyes looked at him as he walked over to the deal painting table that was set beneath the high-curtained window. What was he doing there? His fingers were straying about among the litter of tin tubes and dry brushes, seeking for something. Yes, it was for the long palette knife with its thin blade of lithe steel. He had found it at last. He was going to rip up the canvas. With a stifled sob, the lad leapt from the couch and, rushing over to Hallward, tore the knife out of his hand and flung it to the end of the studio. "Don't, Basil, don't!" he cried. "It would be murder!" "I am glad you appreciate my work at last, Dorian," said the painter coldly, when he had recovered from his surprise. "I never thought you would." "Appreciate it? I am in love with it, Basil. It is part of myself. I feel that." "Well, as soon as you are dry, you shall be varnished and framed and sent home. Then you can do what you like with yourself." And he walked across the room and rang the bell for tea. "You will have tea, of course, Dorian. And so will you, Harry? Or do you object to such simple pleasures?" "I adore simple pleasures," said Lord Henry. "They are the last refuge of the complex. But I don't like scenes, except on the stage. What absurd fellows you are, both of you! I wonder who it was defined man as a rational animal. It was the most premature definition ever given. Man is many things, but he is not rational. I'm glad he's not, after all. Though I wish you chaps would not squabble over the picture. You had much better let me have it, Basil. This silly boy doesn't really want it, and I really do." "If you let anyone have it but me, Basil, I shall never forgive you," cried Dorian Gray. "And I don't allow people to call me a silly boy." "You know the picture is yours, Dorian. I gave it to you before it existed. And you know you have been a little silly, Mr. Gray, and that you don't really object to being reminded that you are extremely young." "I should have objected very strongly this morning, Lord Henry." "Ah, this morning! You have lived since then." There came a knock at the door, and the butler entered with a laden tea-tray and set it down upon a small Japanese table. There was a rattle of cups and saucers and the hissing of a fluted Georgian urn. 2 globe-shaped china dishes were brought in by a page. Dorian Gray went over and poured out the tea. The 2 men sauntered languidly to the table and examined what was under the covers. "Let us go to the theatre tonight," said Lord Henry. "There is sure to be something on, somewhere. I have promised to dine at White's, but it is only with an old friend, so I can send him a wire to say that I am ill, or that I am prevented from coming in consequence of a subsequent engagement. I think that would be rather nice excuse. It would have all the surprise of candor." "It is such a bore putting on one's dressing clothes," muttered Hallward. "And when one has them on, they are so horrid." "Yes," answered Lord Henry dreamily, "the costume of the 19th century is detestable. It is so somber, so depressing. Sin is the only real color element left in modern life." "You must really not say things like that before Dorian, Harry." "Before which Dorian? The one who's pouring out tea for us, or the one in the picture?" "Before either." "I should like to come to the theatre with you, Lord Henry," said the lad. "Then you shall come. And you will come too, Basil, won't you?" "I can't really. I would sooner not. I have a lot of work to do." "Well, then, you and I will go alone, Mr. Gray." "I should like that awfully." The painter bit his lip and walked over, cup in hand, to the picture. "I shall stay with the real Dorian," he said, sadly. "Is it the real Dorian?" cried the original of the portrait, strolling across to him. "Am I really like that?" "Yes, you are just like that." "How wonderful, Basil!" "At least you are like it in appearance, but it will never alter," sighed Hallward. "That is something." "What a fuss people make about fidelity!" exclaimed Lord Henry. "Why, even in love it is purely a question for physiology. It has nothing to do with our own will. Young men want to be faithful, and are not. Old men want to be faithless, and cannot. That is all one can say." "Don't go to the theatre tonight, Dorian," said Hallward. "Stop and dine with me." "I can't, Basil." "Why?" "Because I have promised Lord Henry Wotton to go with him." "He won't like you the better for keeping your promises. He always breaks his own. I beg you not to go." Dorian Gray laughed and shook his head. "I entreat you." The lad hesitated and looked over at Lord Henry, who was watching them from the tea-table with an amused smile. "I must go, Basil," he answered. "Very well," said Hallward, and he went over and laid down his cup on the tray. "It is rather late, and, As you have to dress, you had better lose no time. Goodbye, Harry. Goodbye, Dorian. Come and see me soon. Come tomorrow. Certainly. You won't forget? No, of course not, cried Dorian. And Harry? Yes, Basil? Remember what I asked you when we were in the garden this morning. I have forgotten it. I trust you. I wish I could trust myself, said Lord Henry, laughing. Come, Mr. Gray, my hansom is outside, and I can drop you at your own place. Goodbye, Basil. It has been a most interesting afternoon. As the door closed behind them, the painter flung himself down on a sofa, and a look of pain came into his face. And that was chapter 2. Hello, Bully Birdie. Yes, we have read chapter 1 and chapter 2 now, so you haven't missed too much, thankfully. Eton. Oh, it's pronounced Eton. A well-known school for rich British boys. The most rich and powerful would go to Eton and then to Oxford. Cool, so we've got a bunch of, like, crazy, rich, powerful British people up in this book. Nice. How do we feel about chapter 2? How do we feel about the dynamics that are coming up between these three characters? Lord Henry Wotton, who just seems to want to say stuff. The painter, Basil, who feels like Dorian must be protected in his pure state and feels like Dorian is probably going to be corrupted by Lord Henry. And Dorian himself, who seems impressionable. Leads of this book are stand-ins for facet of Wilde from different perspectives. Basil is how Wilde sees himself, the frustrated artist chasing beauty while worrying his talents will fade and his admirers abandon him. Lord Henry is how others see him, the incorrigible font of witticisms that everyone likes but nobody takes seriously. Dorian might be the ideal beauty that Wilde is chasing, and the futile struggle against that beauty's fleeting nature is Dorian's tragic story. Basil. Interesting. I always find author-based interpretations of stories very interesting because I don't tend to enjoy interpreting books from the perspective of like viewing them as like a way to like tell me more about the author's psyche, even though that's an extremely common like academic way to read books and not like an incorrect way at all. I think that's an interesting perspective though, because I see where you're coming from. I personally disagree with that that characterization of Basil though. Personally. You would agree the book is somewhat of a self-portrait for Wilde. Interesting. You feel like Lord Henry is playing a game. Basil knows, but doesn't want to lose his pet. And Dorian is the puppy who thought they knew what was happening. Poor Dorian. Just so dumb and pure. Interesting. A self-portrait for Wilde. Interesting. That smile, though. I don't fully remember the book. I'd have to fully read the entire book through in order to come back and be like, is this a self-portrait of Wilde? Obviously, there's a lot of Oscar Wilde's personality in this book, but then it's hard to have a book that isn't a lot of an artist's personality. It's hard to have a book that where like each character isn't some facet of the author's personality. My smile? No worries. It is something that people comment on a lot, so I'm not unfamiliar with that. Yeah, I'll have to see. I'll have to see more. I'll have to read more of the book and like get a fuller sense cuz the only real thing that I can remember about this book is the main conceit of the book, which let's not talk about what that is. You know, no spoilers for the people who this is their very first time reading the book and they don't know anything about it, except that it's gay. No spoilers. Interesting. I do think that like for I guess I'm cheers, Damasan. I guess, okay, I'm gonna throw this out here because this is like a feeling that I have, but I haven't like looked into it at all to like verify whether this is a thing. This is just an idea that I gathered when I was doing my bachelor's in English literature, and it was an idea that like popped into my head and I didn't actually look into it. So I'm open to arguing with me about this, whether you think this is like valid or not. But part of the reason that I hesitate to read into books as a comment on their authors or as like self portraits of the authors or deep into the psyche of the authors is that I feel like often books are only read that way as like portraits of an author if that author is somehow deviant from the norm in some way. So if it's like a woman or a person with a mental illness or a gay person or a person of color, I tend to think that for some reason the reading of the book tends to tie in a lot more to the person's biography than it does if you just have your typical straight white man who is writing a book like you know, you take lots of examples of classic historical literature, and while the author's biography does inform the work, like Lord of the Rings, you have like, oh, Tolkien served in a world war, and so like, you know, probably that's in here somewhere. You don't literally have like, let's view the Lord of the Rings as a deconstruction of Tolkien's personal personality. um and I don't know how much that stands up to scrutiny, because again, it was just the it was just a connection that I made when I was in college reading all these books about English literature, and that was how we talked about certain authors. And I don't have like, I haven't read all of classic literature and like researched it, so I don't actually know if my like hunch is correct, or if the connection I made was correct, or if it was just because my teachers were reading them that way or what. But that's why I resist it, because I want these works to stand on their own rather than being a like, well, we've got to like dissect the psychology of the person behind it because people are fascinated by their deviance from the like straight white male norm in some way. Hey, Warren! Hell yeah, black streamers matter. Warren, thank you for resubscribing. Welcome back to the fold. Hmm. You do feel that this book in particular is a strong reflection of Wilde. I will agree there. Like, I mean, that's definitely the case. This book is filled with his personality, absolutely. I'm just not sure how much other books aren't filled with people's personality. It's just that Oscar Wilde's personality differs so greatly from the personalities that we are familiar with that it seems like it's more full of personality than, like, for example, The Great Gatsby seems like it's full of personality, even though The Great Gatsby is very full of F. Scott Fitzgerald's personality. If you, like, know that dude's biography, woo! Ah! Yeah, it's all over that book. Like, ooh, that book is, like, so despondent in a way that Fitzgerald also was. Hey, Warren. But the writers are influenced with their experiences. You do disagree, since you hear it quite a bit with Ernest Hemingway. But didn't Ernest Hemingway have some types of mental illnesses, or am I confusing Ernest Hemingway? I get a lot of white male authors mixed up. I'm sorry, it's just a thing. Because I am including like people who struggle with mental illnesses, or have who historically have had like you know how like, oh, Sylvia Plath, like people who are associated heavily with a mental illness as an author. I'm including that. So straight white men who are like mentally not in like the normal skew of authors that we read is what I'm saying. Hey, Warren! Warren has gifted a sub to Mistress of Sighs. Mistress of Sighs, welcome back to the fold. Glad to have you. Thank you, Warren. We're reading A Picture of Dorian Gray today. When reading it, you get the feeling he was writing about himself in particular, compared to some of his plays. Okay. And that's definitely, Chase, that's definitely going to be a reading and interpretation that we'll come back to as we, like, get to the end of the... Like, maybe as we get to the end of this book, we can revisit this conversation, because we'll hopefully by then I'll have done more research into Oscar Wilde himself, and we'll have like more understanding of obviously what happens in the book, and we can like talk on firmer footing about like this kind of supposition. This is book club. You can't just think of a boring white guy who doesn't have something going on. Correct. That's correct. Again, what I'm trying to say is that when it comes to most straight white male authors who aren't like, like Edgar Allan Poe is really like dramatized for like, oh, he was like mentally unstable and he had this crazy life and blah blah blah. When it comes to like straight white authors who aren't like exaggerated in that way for like being dramatic about like, oh, this facet of his life defined who he is as a person, we don't tend to read their books as a sole reflection of, for example, mental illness, or as a sole reflection of gender, or as a sole reflection of, or we don't tend to talk about it in literature that way. And I feel like that's just like one of the things, I guess it's like, it's a criticism that comes along from me noticing about how black authors were talked about when I was in English class. Because black authors get talked about as black authors, and their books get read to talk about African American history and like black history and black culture, and like that's why they get talked about, and they don't get treated the same way that books that are written by, again, the regular stereotypical straight white male author, where it's just like, oh, let's talk about the books and the themes of the books and like what's going on in the books, and instead they're used as like windows into they're used to discuss black culture as a whole instead of treated as works of art in their own right. I'm hoping that I'm like communicating what I'm trying to get at clearly, because like, again, this is a nebulous idea that I haven't like super fully thought out myself, so I'm hoping that I'm like, I keep it re-explaining it to try and make sure that I'm communicating it properly. Yeah. Okay, good. I'm glad you guys, okay. Seems like you're picking up on what I'm putting down. I'm glad you're understanding. Okay, cool. But yeah, that's kind of where it's coming from. Again, we'll have to get to the end of this actual book to fully and completely understand it, because I don't really remember what all happens in this book, or like what all goes on in this book. Clearly, there's lots of themes of like beauty and purity and morality and like honesty and truth, and what those things are, what they look like, whether what society deems as sin truly is sin, whether what society deems as immoral truly is moral, or is morality in itself somehow immoral because it is dishonest and it is lying about the baser instincts of human nature. These are big themes that are already going on in this book, and those are also like the themes that were like central to Oscar Wilde as a person. Like, they seem to be the ideas that he was the most focused on in a lot of his work, so I see why they end up in this book as well, as like a deeper exploration of those themes. Cheers, Harvest. Alexander Dumas is and isn't in certain ways, because like you have black American culture, and then like you have black culture is a distinct thing in America. It is its own thing. So Alexander Dumas is a black person, and he's French and Haitian, as you said. And I believed, again, I don't know that much about him. Horde. Hey, hello, thank you for the raid. We're talking about literature right now. Again, I'm not super familiar with Dumas, but I thought that Dumas lived mostly in like Europe and France and didn't actually come to America. I had thought. What were y'all playing? Alan Wake, I see. Hello, welcome in. My name is Kara. I'm a variety streamer. You've just popped into book club. We're reading The Picture of Dorian Gray today. But I also stream variety games. I tend to stream narrative-based games and like adventure games and point-and-click adventure games and puzzle games and chill games. So like Nancy Drew, Harvest Moon, Stardew Valley, City Skylines, Monkey Islands, those kinds of games, and like randomizers and stuff like that are what I play. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, please follow along. You'll be very welcome here. Thanks. How have you been doing? I hope you're doing well. Black Swan CQ, thank you for following. Enjoy your apprenticeship here. Sexy Brutale was really good. Harvest, I'm actually going to re-upload the archive of Sexy Brutale to, because I believe that the archive on YouTube has the timing off and gets weird. So I'm gonna fix that as well, just so you know. Malvase and Spartan, thank you both for following. Enjoy your apprenticeships here. Been good, keeping it together. Good. I'm glad to hear it. It's been a turbulent time. I'm glad to hear that you're taking care of yourself well. Oh, you didn't think it did? All right. It's reductive to look at a book of art as only reflections of an artist's experience. Looking at anything through a particular lens is an imperfect way to look at it, particularly for marginalized people's art. Yeah. That's a good example that you just put. You figured you had a cute theory about how Wilde might have empathized with his characters. Oh, no, don't worry. I'm sorry. Muscle, I didn't intend for, like, this discussion to come off as me being like, your interpretation's bad. I didn't intend for that. Because it is a valid interpretation. And like I said, I need to get through to the end of the book in order to be able to understand the full scope of that interpretation, because I don't remember anything about this book. Yeah, I'm sorry if it came off that way. I didn't mean to to invalidate that reading at all, because it is an interesting way of reading. And again, looking at things from the lens of an author is a valid way of reading a book, as long as it's not, I guess I just like personally have that pet peeve of it, just because of all the classes where it's like, let's talk about a black author and only talk about how they're black. And that's just, because I'm a writer myself, it struck a chord with me, and so I'm like particularly sensitive to it, and I'm always like is Atwood seen through the lens of the Canadians? Oh, Chase, sorry, your question before the raid, you said you think it's an interesting concern to balance with specifically choosing to read books and experience works with authors of different color or gender or non-conforming characteristics. How does one broaden one's perspectives by purposefully doing that while not interpreting it with that bias? That's a question. Works of fiction are indeed subject to the biases that you come into the works of fiction with. So, you know, we all interpret books in a particular way. For example, if somebody was reading The Picture of Dorian Gray without knowing that Oscar Wilde was like gay AF, maybe they wouldn't, like, clearly this book is very gay, but maybe they would assume, because of the time period that it was written in 1890, if that was all they knew, maybe they would assume, oh, I must be, you know, it seems pretty gay, but that's probably not what's going on, because people didn't talk about that in these times. And so, like, we bring in our own, like, knowing that Oscar Wilde was very out and openly gay, we bring in that when we read this book. And, like, that's just that, like, if you have, like, a certain opinion of certain people, or you feel a certain way about a culture, then, like, reading books by that culture might reinforce your biases and also might undermine them, but it depends on, like, what your particular biases and stereotypes of that gender or sexuality or culture or whatever are. So that's a really good question. I think reading challenges your biases, generally speaking. And reading multiple books, yes, helps. And also, I think that's why discussing books helps. I don't know. I'm thinking of classes I've had, again, where we were reading Black literature, and I'm glad that nobody from my college watches my streams, because I'm not calling anybody out, but I was in an African American literature class, and I remember we were reading a book that was about a person, it was like a semi-fictionalized autobiography of this woman's experience in slavery, and it was freaking awful. And I remember during the discussion of that book, one of the my classmates, which I went to school in Kansas, and this person was from a small town in Kansas. They didn't know that much about black people, and like there was lots of racism going around on my college campus. But this person who read the book and was like, I just don't understand why she's constantly talking about these things like they're so bad. And I was kind of like, what? And she was like, he was like, she just seems so angry all the time. And I was like, dude, we're reading about a woman who she's talking about her life experience of slavery and like the bias of like angry black woman fed into, and like also I think part of that like southern bias of slavery wasn't so bad. Those two biases connected and made it so that this person wasn't able to connect with the text because he just saw basically like a black woman who was getting too angry about things that weren't actually that big of issues. And so like when I'm thinking of like reading books with bias, that kind of thing comes up because sometimes your biases are so thick that they can prevent you from being able to empathize with the characters. And empathizing with characters is what's going to pull you through your biases and help you to grow past them. But if your biases are too thick for you to be able to empathize with the characters at all, there's a person that I know that I know of, that I don't talk to anymore, who was extremely racist towards Mexicans. And it made it so that he could not empathize with Mexican characters or Mexican people pretty much at all. And so like trying to give him a book that has like a Mexican protagonist didn't work. So like that's the kind of like bias that I was thinking of when you asked that question. And it's like, how do you get past that? You need people to talk about it with, because like he was able to voice that in that discussion with like, why is this lady so angry? And like we were able to like gently withhold our anger and like explain that, this woman was describing being trapped in an attic for like 20 years of her life and watching her kids grow up around her without her and being unable to move because she was hiding there because she ran away from slavery and did not want to get caught and killed. And we had to like really walk him through empathizing with this person and empathizing with this person's situation. What's up with that? Why is she so mad? Um, so yeah, reading is a really good way to counteract biases, but you also have to be there. There has to be that level of openness in the heart to be willing to accept that, like, maybe if this character is doing something that you don't understand or agree with, that maybe they're doing it for a valid reason. You're correct, Sprudy Magoo. The cognitive bias of going into a situation where you're specifically looking for broader voices. To not attribute some of that to their work would be difficult. Okay, so like, okay, this is a very broad conversation that has been going on and is ongoing in terms of like people who are black writers themselves, like whether they're okay with identifying as black writers, whether they want their work to be read separately from their being black, or whether they want it to be read within the context of their being black. It's actually a very personal thing that like basically everybody kind of has their own take about. Um, because obviously, as writers, our experiences inform our work. And part of the reason of trying to get more diverse people into writing books and like getting these diverse books published is so that we can interact with these perspectives that people have. Um, Spree Magoo, historically speaking, the reason that you don't just call them writers. Oh my god. Okay, sorry. This goes into like the academic and this goes into the publishing side of things, but basically it's kind of for marketing purposes. And guys, I'm not going to go into it. I'm just going to say that the publishing industry is horrifically racist. Um, I posted some retweets, but I have a friend, if any of you are interested, I have a friend who works in the publishing industry and who is very much talking about and providing data on how racist the publishing industry is, just because of just because you know, the kind of thing where it's like, sorry, we already published our single black author for this year, so wait until next year. So like, it's partially a marketing thing, but it's also partially Sprudy Magoo because you need to identify these writers in order to help get more of them in. There's like 1% of editors in the publishing industry are black. I think there's only like 3% of like overall, what was it, 3% or 5%? Some very tiny percent of overall books are published by black authors. It's like the statistics are abysmal. And so identifying certain writers as people of color or as black can help them get their work published, because industries are like, oh, we haven't had our diverse book for the month, let's go look for a diverse author. So yeah, it gets really complicated. The publishing paid me hashtag. Oh god, don't talk about the publishing paid me hashtag. It's gonna make me depressed. It's a nightmare. Why is it that white male writers writing YA can get $100,000 for their first book, but like black women writers writing YA get 5,000? It's fine. And like, that has to do with like, publishing companies think people won't buy books by black authors. Only black people will buy books by black authors. And publishing companies think black people don't read, so they don't invest money into marketing these books that black people write. And so these books by black authors don't sell as much. And it's a terrible, like, self-fulfilling cycle. Yeah. Thank you, Cece. Yeah. Yeah, it's a nightmare. But what about in schools though, when they study certain author? All right. All right. Okay. I'm going to stretch this out to the broader context, because obviously I have personal feelings about it, because I'm like a writer, and and I was an English major, and I got my bachelor's degree and all that. So this is all, I'm going to stretch this back out and go back. Because that is a concern, Sprudy Magoo, that comes up in more than just like, why do we call like black directors? Why do we say that this is like a black led movie? Why do we talk about things in our society in that way? And basically, part of the reason that we're doing that right now is because we haven't ascended to a society where removing that distinction of like people of color or LGBT or whatever, we haven't yet ascended into a society where we can remove that distinction and have it not harm those people. So what I mean by that is like, that is a form of discrimination, because we're like like literally the word discrimination, not like, I'm reinterpreting the word discrimination for a second. That is a form of being like, this person is this label. So we're like labeling, we're discriminating that this person is this type of thing. And right now, because of where we're at in society, because society is so inequitable in a lot of places, like, you know, black people don't get to publish books. Black people don't get to direct movies that often. They don't get to direct TV shows. They don't get to star in shows. They don't get to they don't get to do a lot of things that, like, realistically speaking, if society were equitable, we should have like decently proportioned numbers of people in these positions as compared to the regular population, because it doesn't make sense that it's different. And so part of the reason that we talk about these things in this way is because we need to identify that there is inequity, and we need to push more of what is currently unequal. So we distinguish black authors because only like 5% of books published are written by black authors, even though there's clearly more than 5% of the overall writers who exist in the world are people of color. Like, clearly there's more than 5% of all writers in America are people of color. A large proportion more like are people of color. And so right now there's that inequity, because if it was equitable, a similar proportion of books would be published by people of color as there are to people who write books of people by people of color. So we make that distinction to enable us to help make things more equitable. And then eventually, hopefully, we will get to the point in society where things already are equitable and we won't need to distinguish that this person is a black writer or that this person is an LGBT writer, because they will already be like equitably represented, and we can just be like, yeah, we're all writers here and we're all playing on a level playing field. But right now we're not playing on a level playing field, so we need to distinguish it so that we can help out the people who are getting screwed over more. I'm hoping that I made sense. Do I think things are getting better or worse? I mean, sorry, hang on. I'm there's lots of people talking. I'm reading about this. Sorry, Mistress of Size, but I know. I saw that, and yes, I agree. Same level of anger. Yeah. Yeah, Chase, that. Would I say it's along the lines of affirmative action has been? Yeah, that's part of the point of affirmative action, is because, like, we should not have these inequities in society, and so affirmative action is there so that we can make it equitable, and then once it's equitable, affirmative action is going to go away, ideally speaking. Do I think that it's getting better or worse? Currently, I I think it's getting better. And I'm going to explain that because like as like as a person of color, the world that I see is not the world that a lot of my white friends have seen. Just like growing up, I grew up with mostly white people around me. And the world that I've seen is not the same world that they've seen. To the point that like when certain things happen, like Donald Trump got elected as president, or like certain like really grotesque, very overt acts of racism occurred, I wasn't surprised, but my friends were horrified. They were like, "Oh my god, there's more of these people out there than I thought that there were." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, but
I'll
that's
support
because there
you.
always has been." But like historically speaking, there are now fewer racist people than there ever have been. And like the racism is less overt, and that's why we're getting able to start tackling more of the structural and like more of the racist policies that exist, because so many people are on board with the concept that racism is a thing and that racism is structural and it's policies and that we need to dismantle them. So I'm I think it's better than it's ever been for America, and I am hopeful that it will keep getting better, but that relies on us making sure that it keeps getting better. That relies on us, and not more than just like us, that especially, and I'm sorry to say this, but it does, relies on white people educating themselves and caring and like understand, and white people being willing to be uncomfortable is what it like really truly comes down to. Sparty McGill, thank you for subscribing. Welcome to the fold. Yeah. Oh, Mistress of Size, I didn't think of that. Personally, you feel that if you didn't call yourself black, people would use that to harm other black people. Like, she doesn't do that, so why should you use that term? Yeah, that is a thing. That is a thing that has actually happened to people who try who to black authors who are like, please just call me an author. That has happened. So yeah. Um you hope things are getting better. There are a staggering amount of white nationalist police officers, but it's because they, the police, as we're learning, are unfortunately a lot of their policies are very racist. And like policing in America, unfortunately, is based on a racist institution because police kind of first came around because they needed people to catch escaped slaves. So that's kind of where the roots of police are from. And so like So it makes sense that when like police officers basically can't be held accountable for the acts of violence they commit, a lot of white nationalists are going to go into being a police officer because it enables them to enact violence on people of color without having to face any. And then they can just be like, well, I feared for my life. And everybody's like, yeah, that's reasonable. Black people are really scary. You're right. Black people are super violent and like they do drugs and stuff and they are like gang violence and they're like crazy animals. So yeah, of course. And it's like currently, due to people not being able to be distracted from blatantly racist acts, we might be able to move forward a bit more. I hope so. 3 steps forward, 2 steps back the next day. Hey Tim. Yeah, Chase, that's definitely a thing. I was talking to an older, I'm just going to try to make this as vague as possible because I really truly don't mean to call people out. Cuz like I don't like it's not people's fault that they are ignorant and it's not people's fault that they are raised with like racist attitudes because like you don't get to pick where you grow up. You don't get to pick what your education system teaches you. You don't get to pick what your family says around you. And if and like there's an opportunity cost if you're not exposed to these things. You don't even know where to look for them. So like I don't believe in like blaming people for their own ignorance. So I'm like not trying to call people out here. But like there was definitely an older lady that I was talking to about all of the issues going on and like I basically had to do the same thing that we had to do with that one guy in our class where I had to be like, hey, you've heard all of these like Fox News talking points about like protesters and black people and stuff. And like you are coming back at me being like, well, Breonna Taylor wasn't a saint like everybody thinks she was and like saying that kind of thing. So I'm just going to take this and I'm going to move it over here and we're not going to talk about race or police and we're not going to talk about that stuff. But instead, I'm going to try to humanize the people that you live among. And like the particular area where this lady lived had like a real like basically a slum section of the neighborhood because like the entire like it was in the south and all the black people lived on that side, so they abandoned it, they didn't fund it and like all of that. And then like and there was violence over there and it's black on black crime, all that stuff. So I had to like take that aside and be like, but what if we had empathy? What if we understood the cycle of poverty? What if we understand what these people might be going through separate from all of this stuff? And that's how I tend to try and have those conversations, Chase, with people who get like really defensive or like just have been programmed so intensely. Yeah. Your partner's parents in a nutshell. Yeah. Has there, Connor? I didn't know that, but I'm not at all surprised. The war on drugs was kind of. The war on drugs was explicitly influenced by a racist agenda. Explicitly. There's literally quotes that you can look up from people in the administration who admit that that's what it was all about. It was all about that, and unfortunately. And it worked really well. Um, mm, I Black Swan I'm not passing, but I am very lightly colored. It's kind of similar. I didn't like fully grasp the full scope of the situation until I was 20 as well. Oh yeah, it's that it's a lot. That goes into like a lot of different things. And we don't. Um, oh no, the Reagan administration had a lot of wonderful things that they did that have affected America so wonderfully. It's been so great. Um, but there is actually something, since I have a platform and I'm a person who like and I can tell you guys about experiences that I've had with racism so that hopefully if they happen when you're at work or with someone that you know, you can see it when it's happening and you can like identify it and stop it. Because I know that like a lot of times racism, especially racism in like the workplace or institutional racism is very, very subtle, because it's not often people being like, black people are stupid, and it's a lot more of the time being like, well, that perspective's dumb. So I'm gonna tell you guys, I tweeted about this last night, but um, as far as progress for going forward into the future, as far as like hoping that we're gonna continue to make progress after this, it is going to come down to white people being willing to be very uncomfortable and being willing to to accept the authority of a person of color, even if you don't have any experience with what the person of color is talking about. Because like how we got to the world being as racist as it is in the first place is that black people have been shouting about how racist the world is, and white people have been like, but I don't ever see that happen, so you must be exaggerating, more or less. Like, I'm sure racism exists, but it's not that. And so one of the ways that for me, especially in the workplace, racism tends to come up is me sharing a perspective. And like this, where it really gets bad is if like everybody's really excited about an idea. There's been an idea and it was pitched and everyone's like, yeah, this is gonna be great, it's gonna be a great time, we're gonna do this. And then like I need to come in here and I need to be like, hey, so that's gonna bring up a lot of bad things for brown people, so like maybe we shouldn't do that. And like a lot of the times what you are met with when you share these kinds of perspectives is, oh no, that's not what's happening though, like you're thinking about this the wrong way, that's not in there, you're just not understanding what we're saying. And it's, I mean, there's already a lot of presumption of minorities being less educated in the workplace. Like that's not what people will tell you, but when you suggest an idea, or like when I come in and I'm like, here's the thing that we're gonna do, and I see the looks of surprise on people's faces because they didn't think I was smart enough to come in and suggest these ideas. The problem is that a lot of times if white people don't have experience in a thing that you are talking about, they will assume that you are wrong about what you're talking about, instead of assuming that they might not have experience in the thing that you are talking about. So instead of looking at you as an authority on what you're talking about, they will look at you as if you are less educated than them and they are the authority. So you must be wrong about what you're saying because they've never heard of such a thing existing. Please look out for that dynamic at your own workplaces. Please. It is so freaking pervasive. Every goddamn day. Trying to prove to people that I fucking know what I'm talking about, and sometimes having roomfuls of people tell me that I am wrong about something that is historic fact that you can Google on Wikipedia that is true. Please be on the lookout for that. If you're uncomfortable, then you're learning and growing. Hooray! You don't feel that it's this bad. Ooh, harvest. Whoa! Whoa, that's badass. Good luck. You can do it. That's gonna be a hard conversation, but like, damn. I respect that you're doing it. You don't like his tactics, you don't want students to think that's okay? I love, I love how white history has changed who Malcolm X is. I wish people would learn about the Black Panthers and like understand what they were doing, because they're just portrayed as like a terrorist hate group, and that's not what was going on. And like the Black Panthers had like such a big part in history. Okay. Okay. I've never heard of this. It must be fake. Yes. Allow me to interrupt your expertise with my confidence. Yeah. Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Harvest. I will always help if this is the thing that you're trying to do. Black Panther was the leader of Wakanda. What? Yeah. Honestly, if you like podcast stuff, you should know did a great podcast on the Black Panthers. It's like an hour long. You'll get like a very broad overview of everything, including how they started and stuff like that. It's just gonna be a good antidote to if you were like me and you grew up in a public school system, you didn't learn the truth. That's just unfortunately, who writes the textbooks? That's Martin Luther King was totally a peaceful person and was a saint. Yep. Nope. No protest that Martin Luther King had ever became even a little bit violent. Yep. Yeah, Connor. Yeah. Oh God, Tim. Fucking. It's fine. It's fine. It makes me want to cry a little bit. I just had this experience happen to me, and again, I'm not wanting to call anybody out, so I can't talk about explicitly what it was about. But basically, like, you guys know that I'm a big fan of like architecture and aesthetics, and I am German, so I've seen a lot of Europe, and I grew up in the Midwest, and I've seen a lot of things. So there was just a thing, and that is an aesthetic. And I was like, hey, I don't like this aesthetic because as much as it seems really like, oh, back to the country, back to nature, and it's idyllic, as much as it seems that way for white people, for me as a black person, I see that stuff and I'm like, oh, that shit was happening when slave, like this is going back to basically the antebellum South is what it is. Like this aesthetic is going back to the antebellum South, and it's kind of like a whitewashed version of the antebellum South of and of course there's no black people in sight in this aesthetic. And so I was basically talking about how I am uncomfortable with that aesthetic, and I literally had a room filled with 5 white people telling me that I was wrong, to the point that I started doubting my knowledge on the subject. And I was like, I mean, I guess I didn't know. I guess I just don't know anything about this. I guess I don't know anything about architecture or history. And I guess I need to go back and I need to relearn it because these people are all telling me that I'm wrong. And then I went back and I checked and I was fucking right. And I was so mad because it happened again. And I try so hard not to let that specific thing happen, not to let other people tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about, because you get that so much as a minority. You get so many, usually white people, and it's not, that room was not white men, that room was white women. But you get so many people telling you that you don't know what you're talking about, and actually they know what you're talking about, and maybe you're wrong. Aren't you wrong? You should probably just let it go. And there's only one of you, and there's like 4 or more of them, and they're all telling you how wrong you are, and it's impossible to like hold your ground in that and still feel like you're a competent person contributing to work. And like when you face that every day at a workplace as a person of color, where you're trying to suggest ideas and people are shouting you down even though you're correct, I'm sorry. This experience happened, and it was a little bit of a moment for me. So clearly, like, I need to do my own processing on it. We don't have to keep talking about it, is what I'm saying. We don't have to keep talking about it. They're more likely to exaggerate or lie. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly, Chase. Behind the bastards on the Black Panthers. Ooh. I should look into that. Huh. Let's get married on an old charming southern plantation. Yeah, like I'm watching House Hunters and I'm seeing all these people be like, "Oh, I love this plantation style house," and I'm like, "You sure would, wouldn't you?" like I'm sitting there and I'm like, "Yeah, I bet you do." Because that doesn't have any negative connotations for you, does it? That was a time when, like with like in Gone with the Wind, where she's like, "I wish we could have the old South back. Do you remember those warm, relaxing days when we would sit with cups of tea out on the porch, and we would be relaxing and not doing any work?" And I'm like, "Yeah, bitch, who do you think was doing the work? Why do you think it was so relaxing for you?" I'm like, "Girl, I'm about to explode." Oh dear. Amazing, well, not amazing, horrifying. When you have that experience with your own family, yeah. Idea gets shot down, then a white male colleague brings up the idea. Oh, fuck Black Swan. Oh, God. Yep. It's to start reading MLK, but you don't know much about the civil rights movement. Oof. Oh, gosh. Mmm. Plasmograph, I wish that I had a specific resource that I could recommend to you, but I don't have like an MLK specific resource. Hmm. I might have to get back to you on that one because I have stuff that's like about contextualizing the broader history, but nothing that's specifically about Martin Luther King. So yeah, I'd have to get back to you on that. Black Swan, I genuinely like go find men in the places that I work with and like strike up a bond with them and like find the men who like respect me and understand that I have valuable ideas to contribute. And then like that's what we do. I'm like, okay, here's the thing. If you ever see my idea get talked over in a meeting, I need you to bring the idea back up. And then when everybody likes it, I need you to say that it was my idea and that the focus of the conversation should go back to me. And I need to like I have to go and like form alliances with male colleagues of mine to do that specifically. And a lot of times people will still just forget that the idea came from me. They're like, "Oh, no, Todd was the one who had that idea." Um but it's a thing that I do, and I have to have like be good friends with them and know that they're not going to actually take the credit from me. I'm like a crazy person when it comes to credit on projects that I work on because I'm like I fight so freaking hard to make sure that I'm credited for my work. And people are always like, "Why are you being like this?" And I'm like, "Cuz I've learned, that's why." Ooh, yeah, that's a good shirt, mistress. It's pretty because it's pretty. Harvest, yes, that's well, it's because white people don't have those connotations. So they just see it and they're like, "Oh, this is just from an earlier period in history." I don't even know how many of the people look at that particular aesthetic and think that it is from the South. A lot of the people when I was talking with them, they thought it was European. And I was sitting there being like, "It's not European." And that's just because I don't think white people have like as good of a familiarity maybe with the distinctions between maybe not white people, but I think just like Americans a lot of the time can have a hard time distinguishing between old architecture in America and old architecture in Europe because there is some overlap. And so like it can be like a house that looks old since there's not that many old houses in America. Most people are just like that's European because it's an old house and it's structured in an old way. And so I think that that's like part of the confusion is that they see old stuff and they're like, "That's Europe," and I'm like, "It's not Europe though. It's not Europe." It would you would start with his letter from jail, Mistress of Sighs. All right. There's a biography series called Who Is, and Martin Luther King is one of the books. Spurty McGill. And From the Dark End of the Street. All right, y'all got all the book recommendations. Okay, good chat to ask for book recs. Yeah, and reading his speeches. Yeah. Because a lot of the things that Martin Luther King actually specifically says in his speeches are many of the things that people are saying today, like the protesters are saying today. And again, Martin Luther King has been so whitewashed that like a lot of like even the older lady that I was speaking with recently was like Martin Luther King was so nice and peaceful and he didn't want all this, and I'm like Martin Luther King wanted this. I'm like not to burst your bubble or anything, but he was super down for all of this. um yeah, credit should go where it's due. Credit should go where it's due. And I try my damned hardest always to credit people who like work with me on things even if they do a very small amount of work because I'm so familiar with having the credit taken away from me, or like somebody else getting all of the profits of my work, or being severely underpaid a subhuman wage for working on big projects that y'all would be ashamed if you knew. That being said, I feel the need to say, just for the record, um, I'm really happy at like you all know that I work for Did You Know Gaming. I'm really happy there. I get paid like it's that situation is all good. That situation is all good because I'm valued as a human being there. You don't please don't ever think that I'm like subtweeting my actual job. Everyone should be educated about that, but well, our education system doesn't do that, and so we're getting there though. People are and honestly though, like people educating their families and stuff like that is helping a lot. Cuz like as I'm sure you guys have gathered, not as many like if you're kind of racist, you're not going to believe black people when they say the racism we're experiencing is really bad because people have biases against that for one reason or another. They think that you're overstating it. They think that you're trying to frame the race in a certain way. They saw that video of Candace Owens and things like that. So it's that's why I keep saying that like we need white people not to stop because there are just certain people who will not value black voices. And so we can scream all we want about what's going on. There's certain people who aren't going to listen if it comes from somebody who looks like me. That's great, Chase. See, you're the kind of person that I would be like, hey, let's be friends at a workplace. It is really hard talking with family about stuff. I feel that. Maybe someday. Maybe someday we'll be able to just like ban books that like talk about how the Civil War was a war of northern aggression. Maybe someday we'll get there. Maybe. We'll get rid of those worksheets that ask kids to list the pros of slavery. Like maybe we'll get beyond that. Like why would you do that? We need to remember how many people tried to change history. We do need to remember how many people tried to change history, but we can remember how many people tried to change history by banning the books that tell a false history and then saying in our textbooks that tell the correct history that there was a movement, and the movement was called the Lost. What was it called? The Lost Cause. The Lost Cause of the Confederacy is the long term. Please Google that. There's a Wikipedia article on it. But the Lost Cause is the movement that went out and like built all the statues and wrote all the textbooks and tried to frame the Civil War as about something other than slavery. It was like literally a concerted effort. So we can have a little thing in our like elementary school textbooks called "Did you know that sometimes people try to frame the narrative?" And that will be great for our kids to know. Yeah, yeah, exactly, Annie. Tim. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. The videos were probably fake. Oh, Connor, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I know it's hard. I just got I gotta like if I can offer one piece of advice from like a person who is mixed who like because I'm mixed white people come to talk to me about racism a lot. My piece of advice is if you and like God is this is why people don't like talking about this stuff because you have to modulate your own emotions so much when you're trying to talk to somebody about this stuff. If you can try to not be angry at all and try to not get worked up at all by somebody confronting you with like very racist, sexist, homophobic, whatever ideas. And if you can try not to get worked up and if you can try to just connect to their empathy, that's that's usually how you're going to get any kind that's usually how you get the crowbar in. That's how you get the crowbar in to open up their mind just a little bit. If you get angry, they're instantly going to be like, you're just an angry liberal. You're just an SJW. You're just a whatever. I'm sorry. I mean, but that's my most productive conversations have come because of that. That's all I'm saying. Ah, Spurty McGoo, I know. I have that like Enya video on, and whenever I'm really sad, I watch it because it really does just make me so happy. It does. Perspective, bias, and point of view. History is always written by those who want power and how they tell the story how they want told. I know, Black Swan, and that's what makes history so damn interesting to learn about. History is so cool. Sorry, started, we're done. See you in 2020. Yeah. Then the wall goes up. I love that Google did that, Harvest. Also, Oxford Dictionary updated the definition of racism, so that's good. It went from being, I think the old definition of racism was like one person doing an overt act on another person. And the Oxford Dictionary, I don't know if it's fully updated yet, but updated the definition to be like a systemic institution, which is what it is. Judge J. Waddy's warring. Oh, ooh. Oh, yes. Yeah, you've mentioned that before, and I've briefly looked it up, but I have forgotten everything that you said. I'll open a tab and I'm gonna look at it. Yeah, okay. So, we have enough time. I'm gonna read one more chapter. We were having this very good conversation. Is there anything else that anybody wants to talk about, or like questions even for me that you might have? Because like, again, I've said this before, but I feel like my main way of helping contribute to the anti-racist cause, since I can't like physically go out and march and stuff like that, is to help explain things that might be confusing to people. I feel like this is the main way. So this is the way that I like to help. So it seems fine. Okay, good. I might, you know what? Harvest, I might have done that. I might have done that and I just forgot that I did that. I might have just actually uploaded it personally. That's fair. Actually, yes. Oh. Annie, yes, I have. And I actually streamed a bunch of games from that bundle a couple of last Thursday. Oh my god, so many good games in there. So many good games there. Yes. It's great. Oh, Pumpkin is
I'll support you.
freaking awesome. Oh, Black Swan CQ, thank you for subscribing. Welcome to the fold. If Black Swan and Spurty, if you guys want to join the Discord, please feel free to do so. Yeah, Pumpkin's been great. She's been cuddling me. She was sitting in my lap for like 2 hours this morning. She's amazing. Um, sorry, I'm going back to read. Chase, I'm glad that your elementary school taught that. They did not teach that in my elementary school. Oh, goodbye, Black Swan. Thanks for coming. Hey, Spurty Magoo. Oh, God. I'm sorry that you know how that feels. But thank you for the 500 bits and finding the grappling hook. There's only one day left. If you want the itch.io pack, please go buy it. If you know somebody who would want it, you can gift it to them. You know, it's a good deal. It's a good deal. Is every stream archived? Nearly every stream is archived. There was like a stream in the beginning when I first started streaming that didn't get archived. And there are a couple of streams that I personally, I haven't uploaded them because like, basically long story short, I have gotten triggered by certain games and streams, and so I tend not to upload those VODs, partially because then other people aren't getting warned about it, but also partially because you're like, that's just like that's just a me thing. Maybe I don't want that out on the for the public consumption. But almost every stream is archived on YouTube. Yes. They've got really great stuff in there. A Short Hike is really good as well. Oh, no worries, mistress. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that one. I think we're thinking of the same one, Harvest. Yeah. Yeah, that one didn't get archived. Yeah. Yeah. I try to be because I play a lot of the games that I play because I want to help advertise them for indie game developers because I am an indie game developer. So yeah. Good night, mistress. Um So yeah, the archive of the fold on YouTube, that's where all the archives are. There's more going up. I'm sorry, I do this thing where like I do them all in one sitting, and so they'll upload every day for like 2 weeks, and then there'll be like a 3 week dry spell, and then they'll upload every day for a week and that kind of thing. So that's happening. The latest archives are going up. I think they will be current by like the end of this month. Yeah, the horror game ones. I recommend finding a game that you're interested in and just hit and go because I think the archives are generally good times. If anybody wants to, you don't have to do this. This is like a big ask from me. So like please feel free to not do this if you don't want to because really it's my job. But if you are going back and watching archives and I don't have like the stream start times listed because I try to list them in the description, somebody recently asked to put when the game starts instead of just when the stream starts. So I need to go back and like go through all of my VODs and like do that. If you happen to go back and watch some VODs for specific games and you like scrub through to find the time where it starts, if you could comment that, that would be very helpful, but you do not have to do that because that is extra work. That is just a thing that I need to do. But it would be helpful. That's all. Okay, that being said, it looks like chapter 3 is going to be the last chapter that we read today. Age of Mythology. Actually, what I'm going to do is let's take like 2 minutes. I'm going to use the bathroom. We'll decompress. We'll listen to some music to decompress a little bit, and then we'll jump back in because we'll have like a little transition section. I think that will be helpful. A helpful little transition period after a very helpful conversation. BRB. I'm back. Okay. I've done randomizer playthroughs. I'm just throwing that out there. I've done Wind Waker randomizer and I've done Minish Cap randomizer, and I'm gonna do more Zelda randomizers coming. I think there's gonna be a 2 possible randomizers that I will be playing in the future, and I will let you guys know when those are concretely nailed down because those are gonna be possible things that happen on a scheduled day for specific reasons that I'm not going to talk about. The Wind Waker one was hilarious. Good. I've never played Super Metroid before, otherwise I would try that randomizer because it seems great. It seems great. Okay. Now then, we all actually came here to read a book. I'm gonna need to put a timestamp on the stream. Actually, wait, I can put a timestamp on the stream right now because I have the time up in the corner telling me how long the stream has been going. Oh my god, I should have just been doing this the whole time. Okay, I'm gonna say that like 2:55, the chapter starts again, chapter 3, so that I can put that for people who want to catch up on the book. Okay. Wow, so exciting. There's a nothing. There's another nothing. All right, chapter 3. At 12:30 next day, Lord Henry Wotton strolled from Curzon Street over to the Albany to call on his uncle, Lord Fermor, a genial, if somewhat rough-mannered old bachelor, whom the outside world called selfish because it derived no particular benefit from him, but who was considered generous by society as he fed the people who amused him. His father had been our ambassador at Madrid when Isabella was young, and prim unthought of, but had retired from the diplomatic service in a capricious moment of annoyance at not being offered the embassy at Paris, a post to which he considered that he was fully entitled by reason of his birth, his indolence, the good English of his despatches, and his inordinate passion for pleasure. The son, who had been his father's secretary, had resigned along with his chief, somewhat foolishly as was thought at the time, and on succeeding some months later to the title, had set himself to the serious study of the great aristocratic art of doing absolutely nothing. He had 2 large townhouses, but preferred to live in chambers, as it was less trouble, and took most of his meals at his club. He paid some attention to the management of his collieries in the Midland counties, excusing himself for this taint of industry on the grounds that the one advantage of having coal was that it enabled a gentleman to afford the decency of burning wood on his own hearth. In politics he was a Tory, except when the Tories were in office, during which period he roundly abused them for being a pack of radicals. He was a hero to his valet, who bullied him, and a terror to most of his relations, whom he bullied in turn. Only England could have produced him, and he always said that the country was going to the dogs. His principles were out of date, but there was a good deal to be said for his prejudices. When Lord Henry entered the room, he found his uncle sitting in a rough shooting coat, smoking a cheroot, and grumbling over the Times. "Well, Harry," said the old gentleman, "what brings you out so early? I thought you dandies never got up till 2, and were not visible till 5. "Pure family affection, I assure you, Uncle George. I want to get something out of you." "Money, I suppose," said Lord Fermor, making a wry face. "Well, sit down and tell me all about it. Young people nowadays imagine that money is everything." "Yes," murmured Lord Henry, settling his buttonhole in his coat, "and when they grow older they know it. But I don't want money. It is only people who pay their bills who want that, Uncle George, and I never pay mine. Credit is the capital of a younger son, and one lives charmingly upon it. Besides, I always deal with Dartmoor's tradesmen, and consequently they never bother me. What I want is information. Not useful information, of course. Useless information." "Well, I can tell you anything that is in an English blue book, Harry, although those fellows nowadays write a lot of nonsense. When I was in the diplomatic, things were much better. But I hear they let them in now by examination. What can you expect? Examinations, sir, are pure humbug from beginning to end. If a man is a gentleman, he knows quite enough, and if he is not a gentleman, whatever he knows is bad for him." "Mr. Dorian Gray's does not belong to the blue books, Uncle George," said Lord Henry languidly. "Mr. Dorian Gray? Who is he?" asked Lord Fermor, knitting his bushy white eyebrows. "That is what I have come to learn, Uncle George. Or rather, I know who he is. He is the last Lord Kelso's grandson. His mother was a Devereux, Lady Margaret Devereux. I want you to tell me about his mother. What was she like? Whom did she marry? You have known nearly everybody in your time, so you might have known her. I am very much interested in Mr. Gray at present. I have only just met him." "Kelso's grandson!" echoed the old gentleman. "Kelso's grandson! Of course. I knew his mother intimately. I believe I was at her christening. She was an extraordinarily beautiful girl, Margaret Devereux, and made all the men frantic by running away with a penniless young fellow, A mere nobody, sir. A subaltern in a foot regiment or something of that kind. Certainly. I remember the whole thing as if it happened yesterday. The poor chap was killed in a duel at Spa, a few months after the marriage. There was an ugly story about it. They said Kelso got some rascally adventurer, some Belgian brute, to insult his son-in-law in public. Paid him, sir, to do it. Paid him! And that the fellow spitted his man as if he had been a pigeon. The thing was hushed up, but egad, Kelso ate his chop alone at the club for some time afterwards. He brought his daughter back with him, I was told, and she never spoke to him again. Oh, yes, it was a bad business. The girl died, too. Died within a year. So she left a son, did she? I had forgotten that. What sort of boy is he? If he is like his mother, he must be a good-looking chap. He is very good-looking, assented Lord Henry. I hope he will fall into proper hands, continued the old man. He should have a pot of money waiting for him if Kelso did the right thing by him. His mother had money, too. All the Selby property came to her, through her grandfather. Her grandfather hated Kelso, thought him a mean dog. He was, too. Came to Madrid once when I was there. Egad, I was ashamed of him. The Queen used to ask me about the English noble who was always quarrelling with the cabmen about their fares. They made quite a story of it. I didn't dare to show my face at court for a month. I hope he treated his grandson better than he did the Jarvies. I don't know, answered Lord Henry. I fancy that the boy will be well off. He is not of age yet. He has Selby, I know. He told me so. And his mother was very beautiful? Margaret Devereux was one of the loveliest creatures I ever saw, Harry. What on earth induced her to behave as she did, I never could understand. She could have married anybody she chose. Carlington was mad after her. She was romantic, though. All the women of that family were. The men were a poor lot, but egad, the women were wonderful. Carlington went on his knees to her, told me so himself. She laughed at him, and there wasn't a girl in London at the time who wasn't after him. And by the way, Harry, talking about silly marriages, what is this humbug your father tells me about Dartmoor wanting to marry an American? Ain't English girls good enough for him? It is rather fashionable to marry Americans just now, Uncle George. I'll back English women against the world, Harry, said Lord Fermor, striking the table with his fist. The betting is on the Americans. They don't last, I'm told, muttered his uncle. A long engagement exhausts them, but they are capital at a steeplechase. They take things flying. I don't think Dartmoor has a chance. Who are her people? Grumbled the old gentleman. Has she got any? Lord Henry shook his head. American girls are as clever at concealing their parents as English women are at concealing their past, he said, rising to go. They are pork packers, I suppose. I hope so, Uncle George, for Dartmoor's sake. I'm told that pork packing is the most lucrative profession in America, after politics. Is she pretty? She behaves as if she was beautiful. Most American women do. It is the secret of their charm. Why can't these American women stay in their own country? They are always telling us that it is the paradise for women. It is. That is the reason why, like Eve, they are so excessively anxious to get out of it, said Lord Henry. Goodbye, Uncle George. I shall be late for lunch if I stop any longer. Thanks for giving me the information I wanted. I always like to know everything about my new friends, and nothing about my old ones. Where are you lunching, Harry? At Aunt Agatha's. I have asked myself and Mr. Gray. He is her latest protégé. Humph! Tell your Aunt Agatha, Harry, not to bother me any more with her charity appeals. I'm so sick of them. Why, the good woman thinks that I have nothing to do but to write checks for her silly fads. All right, Uncle George, I'll tell her, but it won't have any effect. Philanthropic people lose all sense of humanity. It is their distinguishing characteristic. The old gentleman growled approvingly, and rang the bell for his servant. Lord Henry passed up the low arcade into Burlington Street, and turned his steps in the direction of Berkeley Square. As a quick aside, just for some more historical context, around this time was when people in America were starting to get really incredibly rich, and it was really common for women of the time to jump the pond over to England to try and find somebody who was titled to marry, because at this time the English nobility was kind of running out of money really badly because none of them knew how to manage their finances because it was gauche to talk about finances. So you see lots of like American women with huge amounts of money coming over and marrying English nobility who were poor at this time. Just so you know. So that was the story of Dorian Gray's parentage. Crudely as it had been told to him, it had yet stirred him by its suggestion of a strange, almost modern romance. A beautiful woman risking everything for a mad passion. A few wild weeks of happiness cut short by a hideous, treacherous crime. Months of voiceless agony, and then a child born in pain. The mother snatched away by death, the boy left to solitude and the tyranny of an old and loveless man. Yes, it was an interesting background. It posed the lad, made him more perfect, as it were. Behind every exquisite thing that existed there was something tragic. Worlds had to be in travail that the meanest flower might blow. And how charming he had been at dinner the night before, as, with startled eyes and lips parted in frightened pleasure, he had sat opposite to him at the club, the red candle shade staining to a richer rose on the wakening wonder of his face. Talking to him was like playing upon an exquisite violin. He answered to every touch and the thrill of the bow. There was something terribly enthralling in the exercise of influence. No other activity was like it. To project one's soul into some gracious form and let it tarry there for a moment, to hear one's own intellectual views echoed back to one with all the added music of passion and youth, to convey one's temperament into another as though it were a subtle fluid or a strange perfume, there was a real joy in that. Perhaps the most satisfying joy left to us in an age so limited and vulgar as our own, an age grossly carnal in its pleasures and grossly common in its aims. He was a marvelous type, too, this lad, whom by so curious a chance he had met in Basil's studio, or could be fashioned into a marvelous type at any rate. Grace was his, and the white purity of boyhood, and beauty such as old Greek marbles kept for us. There was nothing that one could not do with him. He could be made a Titan or a toy. What a pity it was that such beauty was destined to fade. And Basil? From a psychological point of view, how interesting he was! The new manner in art, the fresh mode of looking at life, suggested so strangely by the merely visible presence of one who was unconscious of it all, the silent spirit that dwelt in dim woodland and walked unseen in open field, suddenly showing herself, dryad-like, and not afraid, because in his soul who sought for her there had been wakened that wonderful vision to which alone are wonderful things revealed, the mere shapes and patterns of things becoming, as it were, refined, and gaining a kind of symbolical value, as though they were themselves patterns of some other and more perfect form, whose shadow they made real. How strange it all was! He remembered something like it in history. Was it not Plato, that artist in thought, who had first analyzed it? Was it not Buonarroti, who had carved it in the colored marbles of a sonnet sequence? But in our century it was strange. Yes, he would try to be to Dorian Gray what, without knowing it, the lad was to the painter who had fashioned the wonderful portrait. He would seek to dominate him. Had already indeed half done so. He would make that wonderful spirit his own. There was something fascinating in this son of love and death. Suddenly he stopped and glanced up at the houses. He found that he had passed his aunt some distance and, smiling to himself, turned back. When he entered the somewhat somber hall, the butler told him that they had gone in to lunch. He gave one of the footmen his hat and stick and passed into the dining-room. "Late as usual, Harry!" cried his aunt, shaking her head at him. He invented a facile excuse and, having taken the vacant seat next to her, looked round to see who was there. Dorian bowed to him shyly from the end of the table, a flush of pleasure stealing into his cheek. Opposite was the Duchess of Harley, a lady of admirable good nature and good temper, much liked by everyone who knew her, and of those ample architectural proportions that in women who are not duchesses are described by contemporary historians as stoutness. Next to her sat on her right Sir Thomas Burdon, a radical member of Parliament, who followed his leader in public life, and in private life followed the best cooks, dining with the Tories and thinking with the Liberals, in accordance with a wise and well-known rule. The post on her left was occupied by Mr. Erskine of Treadley, an old gentleman of considerable charm and culture, who had fallen, however, into bad habits of silence, having, as he explained once to Lady Agatha, said everything that he had to say before he was 30. His own neighbour was Mrs. Vandeleur, one of his aunt's oldest friends, a perfect saint amongst women, but so dreadfully dowdy that she reminded one of a badly bound hymn-book. Fortunately for him, she had on the other side Lord Faudel, a most intelligent middle-aged mediocrity, as bald as a ministerial statement in the House of Commons, with whom she was conversing in that intensely earnest manner which is the one unpardonable error, as he remarked once himself, that all really good people fall into, and from which none of them ever quite escape. "We are talking about poor Dartmoor, Lord Henry," cried the Duchess, nodding pleasantly to him across the table. "Do you think he will really marry this fascinating young person?" "I believe she has made up her mind to propose to him, Duchess." "How dreadful!" exclaimed Lady Agatha. "Really, someone should interfere." "I am told on excellent authority that her father keeps an American dry goods store," said Sir Thomas Burton, looking supercilious. "My uncle has already suggested pork packing, Sir Thomas." "Dry goods! What are American dry goods?" asked the Duchess, raising her large hands in wonder and accentuating the verb. "American novels," answered Lord Henry, helping himself to some quail. The Duchess looked puzzled. "Don't mind him, my dear," whispered Lady Agatha. "He never means anything that he says." "When America was discovered," said the Radical member, and he began to give some wearisome facts. Like all people who try to exhaust a subject, he exhausted his listeners. The Duchess sighed and exercised her privilege of interruption. "I wish to goodness it had never been discovered at all," she exclaimed. "Really, our girls have no chance nowadays. It is most unfair." "Perhaps, after all, America never has been discovered," said Mr. Erskine. "I myself would say that it had merely been detected." "Oh, but I have seen specimens of the inhabitants," answered the Duchess vaguely. "I must confess that most of them are extremely pretty. And they dress well, too. They get all their dresses in Paris. I wish I could afford to do the same." "They say that when good Americans die, they go to Paris," chuckled Sir Thomas, who had a large wardrobe of humorous cast-off clothes. "Really? And where do the bad Americans go to when they die?" inquired the Duchess. "They go to America," murmured Lord Henry. Sir Thomas frowned. "I am afraid that your nephew is prejudiced against that great country," he said to Lady Agatha. "I have travelled all over it, in cars provided by the directors, who, in such matters, are extremely civil. I assure you that it is an education to visit." "But must we really see Chicago in order to be educated?" asked Mr. Erskine plaintively. "I don't feel up to the journey." Sir Thomas waved his hand. "Mr. Erskine of Treadley has the world on his shelves. We practical men like to see things, not read about them. The Americans are an extremely interesting people. They are absolutely reasonable. I think that is their distinguishing characteristic. Yes, Mr. Erskine, an absolutely reasonable people. I assure you there is no nonsense about the Americans." "How dreadful!" cried Lord Henry. "I can stand brute force, but brute force is quite unbearable. There is something unfair about its use. It is hitting below the intellect." "I do not understand you," said Sir Thomas, growing rather red. "I do, Lord Henry," murmured Mr. Erskine with a smile. "Paradoxes are all very well in their way," rejoined the baronet. "Was that a paradox?" asked Mr. Erskine. "I did not think so. Perhaps it was. Well, the way of paradoxes is the way of truth. To test reality we must see it on the tightrope. When the verities become acrobats we can judge them." "Dear me," said Lady Agatha, "how you men argue! I am sure I never can make out what you are talking about." "Oh, Harry, I am quite vexed with you. Why do you try to persuade our nice Mr. Dorian Gray to give up the East End? I assure you he would be quite invaluable. They would love his playing." "I want him to play to me," cried Lord Henry, smiling, and he looked down the table and caught a bright answering glance. "But they are so unhappy in Whitechapel," continued Lady Agatha. "I can sympathize with everything, except suffering," said Lord Henry, shrugging his shoulders. "I cannot sympathize with that. It is too ugly, too horrible, too distressing. There is something terribly morbid in the modern sympathy with pain. One should sympathize with the color, the beauty, the joy of life. The less said about life's sores, the better." "Still, the East End is a very important problem," remarked Sir Thomas, with a grave shake of the head. "Quite so," answered the young lord. "It is the problem of slavery, and we try to solve it by amusing the slaves." The politicians looked at him keenly. "What change do you propose, then?" he asked. Lord Henry laughed. "I don't desire to change anything in England except the weather," he answered. "I am quite content with philosophic contemplation. But as the 19th century has gone bankrupt through an over-expenditure of sympathy, I would suggest that we should appeal to science to put us straight. The advantage of the emotions is that they lead us astray, and the advantage of science is that it is not emotional." But we have such grave responsibilities, ventured Mrs. Vandeleur timidly. Terribly grave, echoed Lady Agatha. Lord Henry looked over at Mr. Erskine. Humanity takes itself too seriously. It is the world's original sin. If the caveman had known how to laugh, history would have been different. You are really very comforting, warbled the Duchess. I have always felt rather guilty when I came to see your dear aunt, for I take no interest at all in the East End. For the future I shall be able to look her in the face without a blush. A blush is very becoming, Duchess, remarked Lord Henry. Only when one is young, she answered. When an old woman like myself blushes, it is a very bad sign. Ah, Lord Henry, I wish you would tell me how to become young again. He thought for a moment. Can you remember any great error that you have committed in your early days, Duchess? He asked, looking at her across the table. A great many, I fear, she cried. Then commit them over again, he said gravely. To get back one's youth, one merely has to repeat one's follies. A delightful theory, she exclaimed. I must put it into practice. A dangerous theory, came from Sir Thomas's tight lips. Lady Agatha shook her head, but could not help being amused. Mr. Erskine listened. Yes, he continued, that is one of the great secrets of life. Nowadays most people die of a sort of creeping common sense and discover when it is too late that the only things one never regrets are one's mistakes. A laugh ran around the table. He played with the idea and grew willful, tossed it into the air and transformed it, let it escape and recaptured it, made it iridescent with fancy and winged it with paradox. The praise of folly, as he went on, soared into a philosophy, and philosophy herself became young, and catching the mad music of pleasure, wearing, one might fancy, her wine-stained robe and wreath of ivy, danced like a bacchante over the hills of life, and mocked the slow Silenus for being sober. Facts fled before her like frightened forest things. Her white feet trod the huge press at which wise Omar sits, till the seething grape juice rose round her bare limbs in waves of purple bubbles, or crawled in red foam over the vat's black, dripping, sloping sides. It was an extraordinary improvisation. He felt that the eyes of Dorian Gray were fixed on him, and the consciousness that amongst his audience there was one whose temperament he wished to fascinate seemed to give his wit keenness and to lend color to his imagination. He was brilliant, fantastic, irresponsible. He charmed his listeners out of themselves, and they followed his pipe laughing. Dorian Gray never took his gaze off him, but sat like one under a spell, smiles chasing each other over his lips, and wonder growing grave in his darkening eyes. At last, liveried in the costume of the age, reality entered the room in the shape of a servant to tell the Duchess that her carriage was waiting. She wrung her hands in mock despair. How annoying! She cried. I must go. I have to call for my husband at the club to take him to some absurd meeting at Willis's Rooms, where he is going to be in the chair. If I am late, he is sure to be furious, and I couldn't have a scene in this bonnet. It is far too fragile. A harsh word would ruin it. No, I must go, dear Agatha. Good-bye, Lord Henry. You are quite delightful and dreadfully demoralizing. I am sure I don't know what to say about your views. You must come and dine with us some night. Tuesday? Are you disengaged Tuesday? For you, I would throw over anybody, Duchess, said Lord Henry with a bow. Oh, that is very nice and very wrong of you, she cried. So mind you come. And she swept out of the room, followed by Lady Agatha and the other ladies. When Lord Henry had sat down again, Mr. Erskine moved round, and taking a chair close to him, placed his hand upon his arm. You talk books away, he said. Why don't you write one? I am too fond of reading books to care to write them, Mr. Erskine. I should like to write a novel, certainly. A novel that would be as lovely as a Persian carpet, and as unreal. But there is no literary public in England for anything except newspapers, primers, and encyclopedias. Of all people in the world, the English have the least sense of the beauty of literature. I fear you are right, answered Mr. Erskine. I myself used to have literary ambitions, but I gave them up long ago. And now, my dear young friend, if you will allow me to call you so, may I ask if you really meant all that you said to us at lunch? I quite forget what I said, smiled Lord Henry. Was it all very bad? Very bad indeed. In fact, I consider you extremely dangerous, and if anything happens to our good Duchess, we shall all look on you as being primarily responsible. But I should like to talk to you about life. The generation into which I was born was tedious. Some day, when you are tired of London, come down to Treadley and expound to me your philosophy of pleasure over some admirable Burgundy I am fortunate enough to possess. I shall be charmed. A visit to Treadley would be a great privilege. It has a perfect host and a perfect library. You will complete it. answered the old gentleman, with a courteous bow. "And now I must bid good-bye to your excellent aunt. I am due at the Athenaeum. It is the hour when we sleep there. All of you, Mr. Erskine. 40 of us in 40 armchairs. We are practicing for an English Academy of Letters." Lord Henry laughed and rose. "I am going to the park," he cried. As he was passing out of the door, Dorian Gray touched him on the arm. "Let me come with you," he murmured. "But I thought you had promised Basil Hallward to go and see him," answered Lord Henry. "I would sooner come with you. Yes, I feel I must come with you. Do let me. And you will promise to talk to me all the time? No one talks so wonderfully as you do." "Ah, I have talked quite enough for today," said Lord Henry, smiling. "All I want now is to look at life. You may come and look at it with me, if you care to." And that is the end of chapter 3. This Lord Henry person certainly is charming. Charming and bad, and like immoral and bad. He's a bad influence. All these rich people like, "Hey, how should we spend our money to make the world better?" And he's like, "You shouldn't." And everybody's like, "You're right, we shouldn't." And you're like, oh my god. He's a player? What? No. Him? Sorry, I have food. I'm gonna eat it. Him? No. That is going to be the last chapter that we stop off at for today, though. I'm curious, how do you guys feel about the book so far? We haven't quite gotten to, well, we've touched on it. The main thrust of the novel has not yet been revealed, I will say. Although the main themes have been. Who hasn't read it before? The setup is engaging and interesting. That's great. You haven't. Okay. Zek. We had a big long conversation about racism in the middle of the stream, so the actual amount that we've read is smaller, but I really highly encourage you to go back and listen to it, because I think you would like this book. You've read 7 chapters or so many years ago, and you never finished it. Oh, shoot! Harvest! This book gets really... Again, the thing that I remember, this book gets really good and interesting. You just know the parts that get into pop culture / referenced. Fascinating. Oh, man. I'm almost like a little sad that we didn't get to read more of it. Not really, because we did have a really good conversation. But, I do like this book, and I'm excited to... Oh, you had to give it back. Oh, what a shame. I'm excited to, get into this book and go. I'm sorry that we'll have to wait until next week to do it. My throat can only sustain so much talking and reading at one period of time. But I'm hype. I'm hype for this book because it's good. It's good. I like it. Cheers, T2, and thank you. The pumpkin. Is pumpkin? Aw, dang, I was hoping that she was climbing onto back there. She doesn't go up there that much anymore. I shouldn't have given her her little windowsill, because now she just is on the windowsill all of the time, and it was a mistake. Because she never goes up there anymore. Pump like hype. Oh, no, that's Pumpkin, my cat. I would say probably Chariot Dance is hype. Probably. Until I get partner and we have more emotes. That's true. She will go back there eventually. She will. Well, I'm gonna need to go so that I can eat eat some food. Soon. Yes. Would everybody... Oh, let me put on some music. Would everybody like to share one good thing that happened to them today, or one good thing they're looking forward to tomorrow? This book club was fun. I was actually in kind of a sad mood earlier today, I should say. Sad's probably a good descriptor. And so like this book club cheered me up. It was like fun, and we had some good conversations, and I'm excited about the book. So thank you guys for coming. I appreciate it. And like thank you to Chickenfoot for the raid as well. But that's my good thing. Bad days are getting better. Book club is inspiring you to keep writing no matter how awful. Tomorrow you will write. That's great, Harvest. I'm glad to hear it because honestly, sitting down to write is the actual hardest part of being a writer. It's the actual hardest part, which makes writing sound so like not like work, but it's difficult work, you know? It's difficult work. I'm also looking for people to raid. You had a really good conversation with your sisters last night about dealing with addiction. Oh, that's great! I'm glad! That's always a really hard topic to like approach and talk about, especially if you don't know where certain people could be at. So I'm glad. I'm glad that it ended up going well. Pet. Pardon me. Alright, would you guys be more interested in Doom Eternal or in Animal Crossing New Horizons for a raid that we are going to do? Your friend gave your resume to her VP at her school to maybe work. Ooh! DJ Melia! I hope that goes well. Fingers crossed for you. Oh, it's really nice of your friend to do that too. I hope that turns something out. I should be reaching out soon. Fingers crossed. You'd be up for some Animal Crossing? That's fair. Maybe someday, Harvest. Are you guys still using the spoiler chat channel to talk about Animal Crossing? Maybe we should do an Animal Crossing thing. We just have so many different channels. I'm worried about overwhelming new people who come into the Discord when they see how many channels we have. I'm not still playing anymore, no. I felt like I stopped playing for one day, and then once you stop playing for one day, it's like, boom, you're not playing anymore. I was like, I broke my streak, and now I'm just not gonna go back. You know, that's kind of a thing that I do sometimes, certain things. Well, I'm sorry. I still have it. I'll probably go back to play it when it's like winter. I just haven't had a... My free time has been taken up by something kind of specific. So when that's gone, I'll probably be playing it more. I got my money's worth too, for sure. I played for over 100 hours. So, and it's a good game. All right, there's the book club forum. Again, just in case you need it, if you have any books to recommend, that is always helpful. I don't know that many books. I don't know which books are good. I don't know which books you guys think that the chat might like and which books are like safe to like. So it's always helpful to have more suggestions, even if you've already suggested something. And with that being said, we are gonna raid Marketing, who's playing Animal Crossing New Horizons. You suggested one, thank you, T2. I appreciate that. It really is genuinely very helpful. It is genuinely very helpful. But that being said, thank you for coming to book club, for giving the Picture of Dorian Gray a try. And also, again, thank you guys so much for, like, having that conversation. And, like, I'm just always impressed. Every time we have those conversations in the fold, they go so smoothly and everybody, like, asks good questions. And, like, you guys say things that, like, I feel like I learn from too. And it's just always a good time. So, like, thank you for being willing to talk and, like, share your opinions and everything, even about difficult topics. As usual. Oh, Alpha Gamma, thank you for the host. I'm sorry we're about to raid, but thank you. Okay, the timer is running out. So we are going to raid Marketing in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Bye, Alpha Gamma. I hope you have a good night. Bye, everybody.